Hello, this is a guy who likes fanfiction and is too lazy to read, so here is an everlasting flame in audio form. Check the description for the links to the author. Chapter 22, An Everlasting Flame, the Star-Shattering God. The sound of a teleport shattered the silence of the grounds near Garreg Mach. Byleth and Shay had been running tirelessly. The past few days had been hellishly long and difficult, especially on Shay. Her shadow flash had been pushed to its limit and beyond, even despite her ever-growing strength. The further they went, the more signs of destruction they saw, which only gave them both more motivation to continue. While going to Shamhala, the pair had strayed away from any major towns or cities. Now, on their path back, they saw the extent of the damage that Nemesis and his army had caused. Some towns were practically razed to the ground. Their path took them through Federation lands, but nowhere was spared. Holst had attempted to fight back against them, and Count Berglis had done the same. If not for them, Garreg Mach would likely already be in Agarthan hands. They had met up with the remaining Agarthan and Knight of Siro's forces outside of Shamhala. For now, the remnants of the Agarthans that were loyal to Shay would find a safe place to hide. They would never arrive at the battlefield in time, and their presence at Garreg Mach would only cause strife. The road to Garreg Mach was still long, but they could see smoke in the distance. Any further, and they would just be retreating backwards. This would have to do. Shay was panting heavily. Byleth cast a look her way. "Will you be alright to fight?" She waved a hand his way. "Yeah, just gimme a few minutes to catch my breath." He looked out towards the smoke. In the distance, he could see movement. Silently, he raised a hand and cast Recover on Shay. Her breath came a little easier after that, and he breathed a short sigh of relief. Truth be told, Byleth wasn't sure if they could win. Against an army of normal men, he felt they could win, but these soldiers were the elite of the elite, not to mention their commanders. Even he could be overwhelmed if multiple powerful opponents came his way, although the Divine Pulse made that point almost moot. While he'd been able to beat Siro's and Zara's, it had been little more than a shadow of the woman. The real deal had beaten Nemesis in single combat, not to mention the fact that she had an army at her back. To call the odds stacked against them would be an understatement. Their field of combat was simple and brutal. There were no walls to defend oneself. It was a wide, open field, with few bushes. While there was a forest in the distance, it could only benefit the enemy. In this scenario, cavalry and flying troops would be powerful, but every subset of troops would have its own chance to shine. They needed to be prepared for the worst. A hail of arrows could cut both of them down before they could react if he wasn't wary of his surroundings. Shay sighed. "Hey, bye. Is there anything you want to get out of the way before we start this?" He could almost make out the armor on the enemy in the distance. "Something I want to get out of the way," he repeated, confused. "Yeah, you know. Like, any apologies, any questions, anything you want to vent? I don't know if we'll make it through this, so I figured now was the time to ask." Shay spoke quietly. It seemed so absurd. They were standing in what amounted to the middle of nowhere. It was no historic plain, no legendary ruin, no sentimental cliff. They had to prepare for a fight that would end in either the destruction of the world as they knew it or a total victory for those who remained. Shay was sitting on the ground in a road that hadn't been maintained properly in quite some time, and she was out of sorts. Sweat was dripping down her face, and her clothes were ruffled. Now, in the face of what was likely certain defeat, at the last possible second, in a place that meant nothing, she was asking him if he had anything to vent. He stared out into the distance. The sun was setting. The sky above was a quiet crimson, the color beautiful. Soon, the stars would come out, and the moon would rise. "Thank you for staying by my side." Byleth's response was quiet, matching her tone. She glanced up at him, a hopeless smile on her face. "Is that it? I know you're not really a big talker, but come on, that's a given. You're my friend. Of course I'll stay by your side. All this time, and you still haven't figured that out." He stared down at her teasing smile, and something swelled within him. Yes, that was just what she was like, wasn't it? Always earnest, always true to herself and the world around her. That feeling, perhaps he just felt grateful for her being herself. If you are not happy about what I said, then let me change my words. Thank you for going on this journey with me. It would have been difficult without you. There was nothing else he could say that exemplified his emotions better. He'd never known how to navigate them since they started appearing in his life alongside Suthi's, but for once, he felt as though he understood and accepted them fully. She looked away from him, staring out at the approaching army. Anytime. If I had anything to say, well, I guess I'm sorry for trying to kill you, and I'm sorry for being so bullheaded all the time. Byleth unfolded his arms, watching as the last few rays of the setting sun began to sink below the horizon. I've already long forgiven you for that. They were quiet for a long, long moment. Only the distant clanking of armor and the blood rushing through their ears could be heard. Slowly, Byleth unsheathed the sword of the Creator. Shay pulled herself to her feet, looking as prepared as she could be. They're almost here, she noted quietly. He nodded. Shay, where would you like to go when this battle is over? Her gaze snapped towards him. Hey, is this really the time for that? I've heard good things about Deirdre from previous clients. I would also suggest somewhere in Faerghus, but I imagine you've seen enough of that country. He managed a small smile. Shay just stared at him incredulously. You, Arg, you really are hopeless. Sure, who cares? Let's go to Deirdre. I've never been, so who knows what it's like. You're paying, though. Cheap. Pay for yourself. I can and will take back my apology. Byleth's small smile became somewhat more real. The forward guard of Nemesis' army was approaching, but they skidded to a stop when they spotted Byleth and Shay. Neither group made any moves, watching warily. There was still a large swath of distance between them. The sword of the Creator jittered in his hands as one figure pushed through the masses. Within that figure's hands was a near-exact replica of the sword of the Creator, cloaked in darkness. 2 crest stones sat where the true sword had an empty slot. The man's figure was large and imposing, and it was one that Byleth had seen in his dreams. That is Nemesis. The man who stole my blood, my body, and my crest stone. Don't take him lightly. I won't. Nemesis spoke, his voice rough and gravely. I was wondering what could make my men stop at the hour of victory. I'm disgusted to see you again, Suthi's. I will crush this new body of yours, regardless of what you try. Allow me to speak to him. Byleth relinquished control to Suthi's immediately. The goddess' divine presence flooded his body, and his eyes were alight with a green glow as she spoke through him. I will have revenge for what you have done to me and mine, Nemesis. In fact, I almost feel the need to thank the Agarthans for reviving you. Watching my vessel dismantle you will be highly amusing. If you wish to repent, then end your life by your own hands now. Suthi's presence receded, and it was once more Byleth and Shay against an army. Nemesis' mouth curled up in a smile, and he let out uproarious laughter. Refusing to face me on your own, Suthi's? I'll ensure you pay for that. When my work is done here, I will ensure that Siros suffers endlessly at my hands. Now then, vessel, allow me to show you the difference between you and I. Grimly, Byleth lifted the sword of the Creator, and at his side, Shay raised her weapons. I'll handle him. You deal with the riffraff. Byleth ordered. Oh, yeah, the riffraff being the entire army? Sure, I can handle that. Anything else you want from me, your holiness? Shay snarked back at him. Don't die. With those words, Byleth charged forth and met Nemesis' blade, and with a groan of despair, Shay vanished into the vanguard's ranks, sword flying like mad. He just had to trust that she would be all right. From the first moment that the two swords clashed, Byleth could tell that something was wrong. His sword held far, far too much strength behind it, more than any crest could ever hope to grant. There had to be an external element. Nemesis had a grin on his face as he kicked Byleth away. That, too, held far more power than it should. Oh? You look surprised at your own weakness, vessel. The dark sword of the Creator detached itself, flying towards Byleth. With a flick of the wrist, his own sword extended to meet it in midair. Despite the similar nature of the weapons, he found himself being pushed back, his eyes frantically darting about to try to keep up with the maniacally flying weapon. My name is Byleth Eisner. I am a mercenary, nothing more. He gritted out in response. Finally, after 10 seconds of back and forth, Nemesis retracted his blade, raising a hand. A mere mercenary cannot hope to beat the King of Liberation. Stand down, join my ranks, and allow your power to supplement mine, and you may live. If you refuse, then you must be prepared for death. Allow your power to supplement mine. Then, that means enemy tactic engaged, King of Liberation. All of Nemesis' stats are increased by 10 for each member of the 10 elites on the battlefield, and he cannot be defeated until all other elites are defeated. Byleth, you must be careful. He is only offering that because he believes in his unconditional victory. I'm aware. Byleth raised a hand, and he spoke quietly. Ragnarok, burn. Fire erupted towards Nemesis, and with a hearty laugh, he cut through it, launching himself towards Byleth faster than any he'd ever fought, save one. In terms of pure speed, he's faster than Shay, but his attacks come slower. Still, he found himself on the back foot. Little by little, with every slash of Nemesis' sword, he was forced to give inch by inch. Byleth couldn't begin to contest the raw power being poured out by the King of Liberation. His own magic was ineffective against his foe's overly resilient body, and whenever a sword strike did land, it barely, if ever, cut the skin. Nemesis was stronger than most demonic beasts he'd ever fought. Eventually, Byleth knew he was bound to make a mistake, but that time came sooner than expected. Nemesis moved faster than he had before, and with a burst of speed and strength, his dark sword caught the edge of the true sword, and with a yank, it was pulled from Byleth's hands, flying high above him. Not wasting a moment, Byleth clenched a hand even as Nemesis' blade approached. Divine Pulse. The world became monochromatic as time stopped. Byleth extended a hand, and the sword of the Creator fell back into his hands. It was an added boon that it moved within frozen time. Suthies, how many times can I rewind time? 15 times. No more, no less. It would have to be enough for this battle. Hopefully, the enemy forces would lose cohesion after their king was killed. That would make their overwhelming numbers far more manageable. He shouldn't have wasted time fighting against Nemesis fairly. With a sigh, Byleth reared his hand back, preparing to strike. And then, within the monochromatic, frozen world, Nemesis smirked, and the dark sword of the Creator cut straight through Byleth's torso. What? Time spun and rewound in the face of his death. Completely rattled, Byleth found himself standing before Nemesis once more as he extended a hand. Suthies, what just happened? It's the blood within Nemesis' body combined with the power of the sword. Even though the weapon is a fake, Nemesis can move within the Divine Pulse because of how closely he emulates my existence. I had no idea that something like this was possible. Suthies, you just did something, didn't you? I can feel your power trembling. So, it seems that your vessel wasn't enough, after all. Enemy tactic engaged, profaned blood and blade. Nemesis can move within frozen time and is aware of when time is reversed. Byleth came to an instinctual understanding in that moment: if he held back at all, then he would be the one to die. He would have to give it his all until Shay managed to defeat the 10 elites. Only then could he comfortably face Nemesis on even grounds. Igniting his blade in flames, Byleth approached Nemesis, and their deadly dance continued on. Shay danced away from a deadly strike, avoiding the swing of Free Kugel from Goneril. She twisted her body, barely avoiding a swelteringly powerful blast of dark magic coming her way. Burex, they really want me dead, huh? That move will bring anyone to the brink of death. It's not as strong as Quake, but... man, there were a ton of them this time. She'd been on the back foot before, but this was insane. It was taking everything she had left to not die. Dodge one, strike back against another, use Shadow Flash to avoid being swarmed. It was a tightrope act, and she was just windmilling her arms to stay standing. She could see flashes of a different life, fighting with these people. Shay had obviously never interacted with them before, but she could remember their strength. Flashes of what they could do burned into her head in a way that there was only one explanation for. Arvel, thank you for this final gift. Intrinsically, she knew that there was so much more to come from Nemesis' army. They were toying with her, only sending Goneril to meet her and allowing the rest to hang back. If they truly saw her as a threat, a poison swamp would have long since yawned under this field, and both the Agarthan soldiers and Nemesis army would have swarmed her. Honestly, it was incredible that Rhea managed to raise the knights to be strong enough to beat their army, even back then. That being said, Shay knew that she, herself, wasn't a pushover either. Even if her power was exhausted for now, she could still fight at her best for quite some time. Now, she felt truly warmed up. Despite the sweat that poured down her face and the pain that her body was slowly building, she felt stronger than ever. With a push of her power, she entered her awakened state, and within it, it felt as though space itself were her plaything. The attacks coming her way suddenly didn't matter, and the magic that raced her way was trivial. With a swing of her sword and a burst of the profaned magic that coursed her body, she crossed the distance between her and Goneril in a single instance, swinging as though the space between them was nothing. Her blade sung as it struck true, the wild magic within her leaping about, and Goneril's eyes went wide. Within his hands, Free Kugel trembled, and he staggered back. She frowned. My blade didn't do as much damage as I expected. This magic, it's the King of Liberation's army, but here, they're turned into little more than undead puppets. They're the Ainherjar, now an army of long-dead corpses dancing to the tune of another, and nothing scatters that magic like a relic or sacred weapon. I suspect those will have far more impact when a hit is landed successfully. Goneril recoiled, staggering back, and a long-sent physic from Gloucester healed his wounds instantly. He growled, moving to attack her again, but he was simply too slow to land any hits. She wove around his attacks, striking carefully. Even though the false Free Kugel in his hands would kill her if a single blow landed, there was no risk of that. As the sun fully set, Shay's blades found a home in Goneril's body, and with a firm slice, she cut him down fully. The light left his long dead eyes, and he collapsed to the ground, dead. Shay wiped her mouth as she stood to full height, roaring, "Come at me. I'll take you all on. I'm not gonna die here." With the loss of one of the elites, the army around her instantly grew agitated. A falcon knight burst towards her, spear in hand and an achingly familiar shield on her arm. Frildarius. At her movement, and at Shay's frantic dodge, the armies around her descended, and panic settled in. I can deal with a lot at once, but not like this. She could, and would, be skewered at this rate. And then, from afar, she heard a whistling sound. Her ears perked up. She'd heard something like that before several times before, in fact. It sounded like falling rocks. But where would they even be fired fr? Coming in who? Shay's gaze snapped upwards, and the only thing she saw against the starry night sky was a blur of color, before Frildarius raised her shield and something slammed into it at incredible speeds. A wave of wind echoed over the entire battlefield, and Shay was momentarily floored. Even the Aegis shield, one of the best defensive weapons that had ever existed, barely blocked the brunt of that blow, and Frildarius was blown back several yards through the air, her Pegasus whining in complaint. The form in the sky, now that it was falling, was far more clear, and Shay's eyes widened as they landed next to her. Hilda. Hey, Shay. Good to see you again. Been a while, huh? Hey, did you know that Gareg Mach had a trebuchet in its basement? The pink-haired girl's eyes were wide with exhilaration and her hair incredibly ruffled as she looked at Shay. She felt compelled to answer the question. Did Lawrence complain about that plan? Oh, you bet he did. Why do you think I did it in the first place? I'll never pass up an opportunity to annoy that guy. My wyvern's on the way, alongside Yuri and the rest, so it's just gonna be you and me for a bit, K. Hilda hefted the real Free Kugel onto her shoulders, glancing around at the army that had now encircled them. Even if it was just one person for now, Shay felt incredibly happy to have someone at her back. Shamhala had been her first time fighting with an ally other than Byleth since before Epimenides took over, all that time ago. As much fun as it was to fight with him, it felt nice to be trusted by others again, and to know that someone was at her back. Right. Let's link up, Hilda. I guess I could put in a bit of work for you. With a sharp grin, the two of them met the oncoming horde of enemies. Byleth tasted iron as he was forced back by Nemesis Blade once more. This was perhaps the largest test of skill he'd ever encountered. While Nemesis was perhaps not the most skilled opponent he had ever faced, he was by far the strongest. He could only count his blessings that the strength of his foe fell somewhat alongside one of the generals. All of Byleth's focus was dedicated to the enemy in front of him. If it wasn't, then he would have died countless times. Nemesis fought in simplistic patterns. There was no scenario in which he wasn't going forward. However, that choice was often one that was completely capable of dismantling Byleth. When they clashed swords, strikes that lacked elegance were strong and fast enough to kill an unprepared man. If distance was created, Nemesis was more than happy to pit their skill in wielding their relic weapons against each other, a contest which Byleth lost due to inexperience. If they were too close to each other, Nemesis would resort to brutal kicks and punches. While the man wasn't skilled in that regard, his sheer strength and bulk made counter-attacks of the same nature impossible. Magic wasn't an option, either. It barely damaged him or he simply cut straight through it. Until every single one of the 10 elites was dead, Byleth was certain he could not outmaneuver this man. As Byleth was forced to disengage once more, Nemesis rolled his shoulder. Weak. You're so miserably, pathetically weak. You bear the crest of flames, just as I do, so why do you remain so feeble? Face me and accept your accursed blood. Byleth was quiet, panting as he stared at Nemesis. He seemed almost disappointed. I see he's a battle-hungry maniac. Just imagine what you could become without any stimulation. By my calculations, this man lived to be almost 200 years old. Luckily, I will always be there to keep you on the straight and narrow. Suthis spoke teasingly within his mind, and Byleth let out a short sigh. So, will we be immortal? Likely, but I doubt this is the time for this conversation. Right. Shall we give him what he's looking for? Well, we certainly can't have him slandering our name like this. Byleth, show him just how strong we can be. That is an order. Byleth reared his sword back calmly, allowing strength to fill his whole being. The sword of the Creator, its power is endless. Sublime heaven, rupture my foe. An incredible energy filled the sword of the Creator, Suthis' divine might overlaying with his own to fill the weapon with power yet untapped. The whip blade of the sword unveiled itself, racing towards Nemesis with enough strength to topple a mountain. And yet, the only reaction Nemesis had to that sight was a twisted smirk. Ignorant fool. I have killed the goddess with my bare hands. I understand all too well the power of this sword. Allow me to show you that your power, and your efforts, are futile. Heavens fall. That very same incredible power filled Nemesis' blade, and as it met the true sublime Creator sword, Byleth's eyes went wide. Despite the aid of Suthis, they seemed perfectly matched. The two attacks were completely even. And then, the crest of flames blazed in the air behind Nemesis, and his blade overwhelmed Byleth's. He didn't even notice when he had been cut, but a long line of red erupted down his torso. Byleth coughed as he was knocked from his feet, being cast to the ground with that single strike. I've used 3 rewinds already. This can't go on. He outclasses us, but only because of that strange power of his. Byleth, when those flies buzzing around his head are dead, we'll need to go all in. Should I rewind time once more? For a wound such as this? Why bother? You will receive aid soon enough anyway. Bide your time for only a moment. Nemesis approached Byleth's falled form quickly. It seemed that he saw no use in continuing the fight any longer. Byleth knew he couldn't stand or even counter whatever attack the man might send his way, so he didn't bother. Instead, he dug his heels deep into the ground, and as Nemesis approached, he kicked upwards. Dirt flew into Nemesis' eyes, and he staggered backwards for only a moment before he recovered, staring at Byleth with a blazing anger. Before he could approach once more, however, a knife came from behind, slamming into the Dark Creator sword. A green light settled around Byleth, restoring him even as Nemesis looked upwards with a scowl. So, even Suthis requires weaklings to aid her. Byleth stood quickly even as a form rushed past him, a blade striking towards Nemesis. The tall, lumbering man was able to block most of the strikes, but small lines of blood were still cut through on his cheek. When the person backed off, there was very little damage done, but perhaps that was never their intention. Fancy meeting you here. You know, I had this whole plan where we would set up traps all along the road to Gareg Mach and we would burn their army up in a glorious blaze before they even stepped foot in the monastery, but since you're here, I guess we can just fight out in the open, huh? Yuri Leclerc gave Byleth a wry smile, one that he returned. My apologies. Had I known of your plans, I would have told you not to implement them. Yuri shook his head. Always a jokester, huh? Well, to be fair, this guy is beyond us. As much as I would love to stay around and get killed here, I think we're gonna leave him to you. Might as well give him a parting gift on our way out the door, though, right? A head of red hair joined him at his side, and Happy nodded up at him. From behind, the remaining 2 members of the Ashen Wolves joined them. Sup, Chatterbox. Yuri Bird, if you're gonna say something cool, make it quick. Dude looks pissed. Nemesis was, indeed, already approaching them once more. Yuri nodded. Ashen Wolves, move out. We've got a fight to win. Ally tactic engaged, the Ashen Wolves howl. Set the Ashen Wolves loose on the enemy. Yuri led the charge, his blade barely faster than Nemesis. With his relic, he moved faster than most, but he was still evenly matched with his opponent. Balthus, however, was the one to make a difference. He dashed through Nemesis with a blisteringly powerful punch from his gauntlet, the energy of the relic crackling and bursting. With that strike, Nemesis staggered, and magic rained down upon him almost instantly. Dark Spikes T from Happy and Abraxas from Constance. The King of Liberation grunted, taking the full brunt of the attack with barely any damage dealt to him. Before Nemesis could counter-attack, Byleth had already met his blade once more. Yuri gave a mock salute from behind the towering man. Hope you enjoyed your breather. That's all we can do for now, so you better thank us later. Don't die, Chatterbox. Happy called out listlessly. Hey, if you can beat down the King of Grappling, you can beat this guy down, too. Don't give up now. Balthus boasted. Don't die early, my test subject. Constance cackled as she ran into battle, magic charging the air around her. I don't remember being her test subject at all. Still, their words filled him with resolve. Even when facing down an impossible foe, he knew he could survive. 12 divine pulses left. I can win. Shay was panting. It was getting harder and harder to keep moving at her maximum. Her awakened state had long since faded. Thankfully, Hilda was at her side, and the girl was incredibly strong. Together, the pair had managed to defeat Frildarius, but that was when the worst happened. The moment Frildarius went down, a purple, poisonous swamp swept over the battlefield. Nemesis' army was completely unaffected by it due to the nature of the magic that reanimated them. The Agarthan soldiers were affected, but they were usually on higher ground and were also mages, so they might as well have been unaffected entirely. This turned their situation from dire to nearly unwinnable. If they couldn't end this battle soon or defeat Lamine in short order, it would be their loss. Their current enemy was Karen, with support from Gloucester. The ancient mortal savant was hellishly quick. It was nearly impossible for Hilda to not get skewered, let alone get a hit in edgewise. It mostly fell to Shay to bear the brunt of the attacks, and she could see where they got their status as legendary warriors from. Thunder Catherine lived up to her predecessor, for sure. But Shay's stamina wasn't endless, and even the strongest of soldiers would make a mistake when exhausted. Her blades moved quick, almost fast enough to cut through the mortal savant's strikes, but in her weakened state, it simply wasn't fast enough. Karen's dark thunderbrand snaked its way through her blades, and pain rippled through her as her stomach got a harsh gash. Blood almost instantly started to pour to the ground, and Shay grit her teeth, stumbling over herself to back up. That was all the Ancient 10 elite needed. He pushed forward, thunderbrand rising in the air. Hilda was moving to help, but it wouldn't be nearly fast enough. Shay's eyes widened, realizing that she may meet her end here. She'd already pushed Shadow Flash a bit too far, and she had no elixirs left. But before that blade could fall, an arrow slammed through Karen's head. Shay stared, completely aghast, as one of the strongest warriors in history fell to the ground without any fanfare, his limbs completely dead. Her head snapped to where the arrow had come from, but before she could make anything out, there was a sudden tide of attacks from the surrounding soldiers. They were plenty content to allow their commander to fight alone, but they were clearly quick to avenge him. She raised her blade, trying to ignore the painful jostling of her stomach, but before she could land even a single blow, a horse broke through the Liberation Army's forces, a rough hand grabbing her by the arm and hauling her up to the front of the saddle. She looked up, almost panicked. But, when she saw a familiar face, her limbs almost went slack. From behind her on the front of the horse, Dido looked back at her with concern on his face. "Shay. Are you all right?" "Truthfully, no." She grit words through her teeth, trying to hide her injury from his eyes. Who else is here?" From behind Dido, a head of ashen gray hair popped up. "Shay. Oh, it's good to see you again. We were all worried about you." "Ash." She knew that Ash was still at the monastery, but seeing both of them was almost overwhelming for her. If she saw the rest of the Blue Lions. "Shay. As much as I would like to continue our conversation, the horse cannot support 3 adults for long. Just, answer me this. Do you still fight for King Dimitri?" I think that, even if I had actually tried to kill Byleth, Dido would understand if I said that I did it for Dimitri. He would probably do the same if the situation called for it. Of course. I'm a Blue Lion through and through, and I want to see this fight to the end. Still, even if she said that, wasn't it too overwhelming? They were outnumbered by such a vast number. Too many of the 10 elites remained alive still, and she couldn't bear to look in Byleth's direction. She knew how strong Nemesis could be, especially once enhanced by Agarthan magic. With this poison swamp around them, if they couldn't take down Lamine, then there was no point in bothering to fight. Their entire army would wither away before they could even manage to land a few good hits. Dido shook her from her reverie with a hum. "You once told me that you wanted to prove yourself to me through battle. That your skills would win you trust and respect. If you are willing to do so one last time, then I will forgive any of your past transgressions." An enemy soldier approached them. Dido's axe slammed outwards, cutting them down without a second thought. His growth was honestly impressive. Ash groaned from behind him. "Hey, Dido, didn't you say that you wouldn't do this? You were the one who pushed us to forgive her." Shay locked eyes with Dido, managing a teasing smile despite the pulsing pain in her stomach. He simply closed his eyes calmly. "Perhaps I did, but that was then and this is now." Without saying another word, Shay jumped from the horse, raising her swords once more. "Right, I hear you, Dido. So, all I gotta do is beat the snot out of these guys to get you to trust me again, huh? In that case, just leave it to me." A piercing shriek from afar snagged Shay's attention instantly, and she whipped her head over to Hilda. She was under attack and heavily, too. She didn't seem to be in too much trouble, but she was also coated in gunk from a demonic beast, so it was par for the course for her at this point. "Dido, go help Hilda." "I'll be fine here," Shay ordered. He stared at her calmly despite the raging battle around them. "I can clearly see that you are injured." A shaky grin split her face. "Yeah, but, not for long." And that was because there was a harsh line being cut through the Liberation Army. With a storm of dark magic, a man with a familiar scowl had burst his way here, dragging a green-haired man behind him. "Hey, Hubert. Linhard. Need some help over here," Shay shouted, barely managing to dodge an attack from a soldier and counter-attacking quickly. They really do have a lot more commanders than us right now, not to mention the sheer size of their army. If things go poorly, there's not a chance in hell that we'll make it through here. A green glow of magic settled over her, and she almost cried as her wound closed. "Thanks, Linhard. You're a real stand-up guy, you know that. Please, don't mention it. I don't want to be saddled with too many more responsibilities as it is. This is stressful enough for me." "Right, he's got a fear of blood or something, right? Never got to know him that well." Hubert just scowled at her. You are very clearly the mercenary instead of that Agarthan. You and the people you surround yourself with have a knack for making the work I put in useless, don't you?" A soldier's sword came down towards Hubert, but Shay was prepared. With a swift shadow flash, she leapt in front of the blade and cast it aside, cutting down the soldier in one swift blow. "Sorry for making you worry or whatever, but you have to be careful out here." The only person watching your back is yourself. If you look away for even a moment, you'll lose everything," she warned, an edge of seriousness to her voice. Hubert merely grunted in response. Linhard was already casting offensive magic towards their enemies. "When we were in Abyss, Yuri said that it was Ash, Didu, Hubert, Linhard, Hilda, and one more left behind. That person." Hesitantly, she glanced back towards Hilda. She was on her wyvern again, but more importantly, the person that Shay didn't really want to see was riding a horse beneath her. Having spotted her looking at him, Lorenz twirled his hair, and it took everything that she had to suppress a groan. "That's everyone, I think. I can see Yuri and the Ashen Wolves fighting closer to the front. Byleth is fighting against Nemesis, but it's a losing battle. Hubert and Linhard are with me, and Ash, Didu, Hilda, and Lorenz are together. We've only taken out Goneril, Frildarius, and Karen so far, but some of those were just lucky and I'm already feeling the effects of the poison swamp. Can we really do this? Tactically, isn't this impossible? Haha. You're keeping up well, boy. I never would have imagined that a vessel of that thing would keep up with me as well as you have." Nemesis' eyes were alight with amusement, and it was taking everything that Byleth had to keep up with his actions. The King of Liberation was markedly weaker than he was when they started. That did not, however, mean that Byleth was capable of beating him yet. Again and again and again, they had clashed blades. Slowly, he was accumulating damage on his body. Eventually, a rewind wouldn't mean anything. He would have to practically restart the entire battle to lose what injuries he was accumulating, and mentally, he wouldn't have the focus to replicate what he's done so far. Stopping time was useless here. In fact, it would only benefit Nemesis. He could move completely unhindered within that frozen time, and Byleth was the one who had to bear the mental strain of stopping it in the first place. Rewinding time only let Nemesis know that whatever he was doing would work, and he fought with a massive surge of vigor whenever that happened, even if he didn't know what, exactly, his actions would accomplish. Byleth's two biggest crutches had been swept out from under him. Still, his long stint of time honing his skills as a mercenary during a war hadn't failed him. His father was the Blade Breaker. Byleth was well accustomed to handling powerful attacks. Those skills were the only reason he was still alive. He was down to 9 uses of the Divine Pulse. He'd died 6 times against Nemesis so far. He suspected that, without the Sword of the Creator and the Chalice of Beginnings hanging at his waist, he would have died far, far more. The Chalice was unsuspecting. It didn't provide a direct benefit that an average fighter would notice. Byleth, however, was far from average, and could see the true boon that the sacred object lended. Attacks that should never have landed would stretch and warp to strike true. Distances that the sword could not reach were suddenly crossed by an ever-so-subtle bolt of magic. Attacks that should have nearly taken off an arm only grazed the top of his skin. In some ways, it provided him protection. In others, it provided him with the means to attack. Regardless, he could tell that it was invaluable to his survival, even if the exact nature of the artifact wasn't known to him. Not only that, but it seemed to protect him from the effects of that poison swamp, even if only marginally. The forces garrisoning Garreg Mach had all joined the battle. Their chances of victory were as high as he imagined they would become. He could hold out here, but the rest, he would have to leave the rest to Shay. The moon was slowly rising in the sky. Distantly, Shay was aware that they needed a miracle. Gloucester had fallen by Lorenz's hands. The bishop hadn't managed to stay standing against the assault from the Dark Knight. Resistance only grew far harsher after that, however. Daphnel and Gautier had chosen to attack them as one, and Regan was attacking from afar, the fail knot in his hands landing true more often than they would like. Daphnel, Gautier, Dominic, Bladdid, Lamine, and Regan remain, not to mention Nemesis. There are also several demonic beasts on the battlefield. The poison swamp was becoming too large of a problem to ignore. Soldiers were beginning to fall because of it. Hey, Hubert. I need to go deal with Lamine before this swamp swallows us up. She called out. Hubert grunted with annoyance, glancing in her direction. And what, pray tell, do you wish for me to do with this information? Do as you please. She swallowed heavily. I'm telling you because you're in charge until then. Don't let anyone die. Whatever his response might have been was swallowed up by the noise of her shadow flash as she darted through the enemy soldiers. Many of them were pushing their fellow men forwards with a single-minded determination to kill those who opposed their king. That doubt that had slowly been filling her was beginning to gnaw at her gut. They couldn't afford to lose here, but what could they even do to win? The 10 elites were insanely tough. She wasn't even sure that she could kill Lamine quick enough to be useful, let alone get rid of the rest of the elites in time to help Byleth with Nemesis. There was no more time for useless thoughts. She saw Lamine right in front of her. The Gremory was at the back of the battle, as expected. With one final shadow flash, Shay was in front of one of the most pivotal members of the 10 elites. The ancient woman's eyes went wide at Shay's sudden presence, and she raised her tome to attack almost instantly. Shay was faster. Her swords rushed out, cutting that tome from her hands. With a twirl and a flourish, her blades came down upon the now defenseless woman. But, with a flash of light from Lamine's chest, the attack was repelled. Shay grit her teeth as she staggered backwards. That damn Raphael gem. Before she could make a second attack, there was someone bearing down on her, a brutishly strong attack coming from her side. She was forced to retreat a few steps to avoid it, a spear digging into the earth. She glared at the sight. Bladdid. Our king was wise to leave me to guard you, Lady Lamine. Bladdid's voice was highly amused as Lamine retreated a few steps. Don't waste your time blathering, Bladdid. Deal with this pest. I need to concentrate. Lamine hissed at him, recovering her tome. Shay grit her teeth. Damn it. Damn it, damn it, damn it. The Raphael gem would make dealing any damage to Lamine difficult under good circumstances. Now, having to contend with Bladdid would make that task all the more difficult. A twisted version of Eridbar approached her, and Shay was forced on the back foot once more. Dimitri had been powerful. Insanely so. He'd mentioned his father being strong as well. Their ancestor wasn't any different. That same brutish strength that filled Dimitri was equally present in Bladdid, if not stronger. The differences between a minor crest and a major crest were all too apparent in this battle. Fighting against an opponent using Eridbar was almost nostalgic, if not for the clear and apparent differences in fighting style. Despite the differences in strength, she could safely say that Dimitri was a far more dangerous opponent than Bladdid. Dimitri had fought with an incredible might, always leveraging his build, his strength, and his rage to his advantage. Still, despite that, he managed to use a controlled, refined style that reflected his royal upbringing. The Bladdid in front of her, however, was leagues different. Not only did he utilize wind magic in between his swings, but he fought far more like the typical Dark Knight that he was, using his spear to create distance and landing devastating blows when the opponent's guard was down. It was an effective strategy, but it never overwhelmed like Dimitri's had. Unfortunately, even if he was less dangerous than his descendant, he was more than Shay could handle in her weary state. Every time she tried to focus on Lamine, Bladdid would cut her off and rout her attempt. She couldn't just ignore the spear coming to her back, and Bladdid kept annoyingly close to Lamine, refusing to engage when he knew that it was her loss to ignore them. She was panting. She could practically feel the dark swamp underneath her feet sapping away her energy. One final shot. I need to take down Lamine with one quick attack. This current state of affairs can't be allowed to continue. With her teeth set in a harsh line, Shay dug deep into her power. With a burst of her shadow flash, she was behind Lamine once more. The Gremory had little protection outside of Bladdid. It seemed that whoever had joined her was now fighting with what the rest of the army. Her sword flashed out with incredibly swift strikes. Dark magic swirled around them as she attacked, a cyclone of power forming around her. She poured out everything she had and more, not caring as the Raphael gem burned red hot. More and more and more she attacked. Bladdid's attempted interference did nothing. He couldn't strike her through her rapid warps. And then, finally, the poison swamp receded, and Lamine fell, never to stand again. Shay staggered as she returned to herself once more. She felt burnt out to the core. She could barely even remain standing. She'd used far too much power to ensure that went as planned. You, harlot! Bladdid roared as Lamine fell, the ancient elite raising Eridbar. Shay could do nothing but dimly watch as he directed his horse towards her. Yeah, it's up to you guys from here. I paved the path ahead, so you just have to walk it, alright? Bladdid raised Eridbar, the dark relic crackling with power. Shay tried to force her body to move, but the most she accomplished was a few tilted steps away from the path of the attack. She could see her death approaching. She couldn't even raise her swords properly. Sorry, bye. Don't think we're going to Derdriu. This battle, it was hopeless from the start. But an absence of hope didn't mean an absence of a miracle. When the human mind is threatened with death, the body is flooded with adrenaline. That adrenaline forces the brain into overdrive, where it picks up on and reacts to stimuli that would otherwise go unnoticed. Before Eridbar could cut her down, there was movement from behind. She could hear the rapid footsteps, too rapid to be from one person, too few to be from a group. There was only one person she knew of with that speed. Bladdid's Eridbar never hit her. Before it could make contact, someone had moved in front of her, shield at the ready. Despite the overwhelming strength behind the blow, it held firm. With dark hair shining in the moonlight, Felix Hugo Frildarius stood in the way of the spear. Felix. Her voice was small. Felix pushed Eridbar back, slicing out towards the 10 elite with an electrically powered blade. Bladdid was forced to retreat, his horse dancing backwards as he stared at them warily. Shay, are you stupid or something? What did you think you were doing, going and getting yourself lost like that? Felix's words were harsh, cast from over the shoulder with nothing more than a scant glance at her. Her eyes watered. That was Felix, all right. Well, you know I'm not very good with maps. Felix scoffed. Next time, make sure you come back sooner. You know how hard it is to wrangle these idiots together. As he spoke, a familiar falcon knight flew past them, a dark knight galloping alongside her on the ground. The pair immediately began to attack Bladdid, who found himself on the back foot from their combined assault. Sylvain, Ingrid. The pair were fighting with an incredible synchronicity, their attacks feeding into and bolstering each other. When Felix joined them, they had Bladdid pinned in a tight triangle attack. Another horse walked to her side, Rodrigue striding atop it. It's good to see that you're well, Shay. I imagine you have quite the tale to tell us when we've routed this enemy. She couldn't meet his eyes. How, are you all here? Why, it isn't just us. The entirety of the forces that led the battle at Inver are here. Felix was just a little more gung-ho and wanted to get in on the action early. I imagine a more coordinated assault will be launched momentarily. As Rodrigue spoke, warm healing magic settled over Shay, and a calming hand fell on her back. It's good to see you again, Shay. You didn't get hurt too badly while we were gone, did you? Mercedes gave her a warm smile, and from behind her, Annette approached, Crusher in a beaming smile in hand. I'm so glad you're okay. You worried us all sick. Shay was floored. She didn't know how to respond to any of this. She had expected them to hate her, or at the very least be mad at her, or something, not whatever this was. In the face of all of this, she could only manage to get out a few words. I'm sorry that I've been gone so long. Rodrigue hummed. So long as you are all right, that's all that matters. Felix, have you finished yet? You know, you can help out, old man. Felix snarled back. Bladdid roared as he was cut by the sword of Merelta, the weapon gliding through the armor on his arm. Sylvain and Ingrid capitalized on that weakness, both of them stabbing through the now undefended portions of Bladdid's armor. Despite Felix's annoyed rebuttal, they had managed to defeat Bladdid in short order. Shay watched as the fiery member of the 10 elites fell with nothing more than a snarl. The three fighters approached, Felix wiping blood off of his sword. Sylvain greeted her with a jaunty wave. Hey, Shay. Man, I've missed having your pretty face around here. Ingrid swatted him on the back of the head. Stay focused, Sylvain. This is still a war zone. Shay, what are your orders? She blinked, taken aback. Every single member of the Blue Lions was staring at her. My orders? But I. Felix snorted. When did you learn how to make that face? Don't tell me you're getting held back by what happened in the past now. Far as I'm concerned, you're Shay, our commander. You've been our commander from the very start of this whole damn war. So are you gonna command or not? Staring at their expectant gazes, feeling their sheer trust, Shay felt something bubble up in her chest. A feeling which had previously been smothered, which had constantly, time and time again, been tested. Knowing that she had her friends at her back, knowing that there was a future for her, knowing that tomorrow lay just over the horizon, well, there was nothing to do but go for it, right? It had never been her style to think too heavily about this kinda stuff. Getting bogged down in the what-ifs and the maybes, all of that wasn't the way she had resolved to live her life. She wanted to seize her future with her own hands. When did she forget that? When the opponent was stronger than her, she was supposed to think hard and fight even harder. Not once had she chosen to give up, not once had she chosen to let her allies down. What had gotten into her, being willing to die like that? With them at her side, a spark of hope welled up in her heart and burst into an inferno, and she felt more rejuvenated and full of energy than she ever had. Blue Lions, let's win. For the things we've lost, and the things we so desperately want to keep. We'll fight with all we've got, for everyone that's helped us along the way. For the dreams from the past and the hopes of the future, we'll fight to protect the present. Under the shining moon, Faerghus rallied against one final foe. Ally tactic engaged, an azure moon rises. Set the kingdom army loose on the enemy. Byleth's blade was losing strength. His entire existence felt like it was flickering. 5 divine pulses remained. Blood trickled down his head. It was beginning to get in the way of his eyesight. With a flare of fire and a flick of his sword, he cauterized the wound, ignoring the screaming pain that came with the action. Nemesis had received a strenuous drop in strength. It was noticeable, and enough for Byleth to remain in this fight for just a while longer. It was also enough for Nemesis to begin regarding Byleth with caution, his flame-red eyes boring deep into him. Your strength, it is real. But it is oh so feeble. You haven't been crushed yet, but you are hovering between the boundary of life and death. Nemesis' voice was at a cruel, low timbre. Suthies, how much longer do you think it will take before we run out of divine pulses? 5 to 10 minutes, at our current rate. If your allies are quick with defeating those flies, and with careful uses of our rewinds, we can perhaps double that time. I don't know if I can make it that long. Do you need a break? It's impossible to create one. I'm the only one who can fight him. Suthies sighed. Hush now, my dearest vessel. Please, allow me to handle things from here. I will call you back when necessary. Suthies? What are you? Before Byleth could think anything else, his consciousness fled him completely, his eyes closing for just a single breath of time. When they opened once more, they were filled with a divine glow. Suthies exhaled softly as she raised her head. Byleth's body was nothing like her own, and yet it was shockingly fitting at the same time. It was easy enough to send him into a light sleep. For now, she would bear his burdens for him. She raised the sword, frowning at the feeling of nausea that overwhelmed her body. Byleth had bled more than she imagined, and he had eaten less that was needed for the amount of energy he was consuming. I'll ensure you are in fighting form, Byleth. Nemesis had noticed the change, she knew. When Suthies turned taunting eyes in his direction, he grit his teeth and raised that abomination of a blade. Suthies, so, you raise your head once more? Such a nuisance. You should have stayed in that grave that my daughter shoved you in. Since you're so insistent on crossing blades with me, then I'll show you the true meaning of that power you stole. Her voice coming from Byleth's mouth was discordant. It warped the sense of the words, taking a normally deep and masculine tone and turning it into something haughty and feminine. Such a voice did not fit Byleth, just as her soul did not fit perfectly within his body alongside its owner. She could not pilot this vessel for long without erasing him. Byleth had been using the sword correctly, but he didn't see the full potential of what he held. The divine pulse, the chalice of beginnings, the crest of flames, and the sublime sword of the Creator, with all factors combined, Byleth was as close to a godly existence as could exist. He merely had not reached that conclusion yet. The power he held was something that she knew intimately, and thus, she would use all of them to their fullest potential in order to wrangle as much time together for both of them as possible. The sublime sword of the Creator, alight with divine power, rapidly and jerkily extended outwards. Nemesis reacted quickly, but the fool couldn't hope to respond to the power of a goddess. His blade was raised to counter-attack, completely missing the purpose of the attack. With my spine as my weapon, I call upon divine power. Erupt, sublime heaven. Suthi's declaration was quiet and measured, her lips tilted upwards in a smile. Once more, I shall show you the futility of your actions. Heavens fall. Nemesis' voice boomed across the battlefield. The two blades never met. The sublime Creator sword snaked around the dark Creator sword, avoiding every strike. Suthi's calmly retreated 3 steps, the false sword cracking at the air mere centimeters from her face. Her attack, however, had never been meant for Nemesis. With a burst of power that welled up from the chalice of beginnings, the sword's power erupted, and the crest of flames burned within Byleth's blood. Before Nemesis could react, the sword slashed past him. Not once had the blade been meant for his accursed head. No, instead, it was meant for the legion of soldiers at his back. While they had stayed out of the fight for their own survival, that didn't mean that she couldn't use them for her own purposes. As the sword's power cut them down completely, Nemesis' eyes went wide. Energy flooded her body, and her wounds healed. With a smirk, Suthi's wiped the corner of her mouth with her thumb, feeling the digit come away wet with blood from a wound that had already closed. This will buy him some time when he comes back to himself. My apologies, Byleth, but I will try to buy you as much time as possible. Whatever I can't accomplish will be left up to you. Nemesis' eyes snapped back to her as the sword of the Creator snapped back into its original position. You're a conniving witch. I see now why those cowards were forced to wait until you were indisposed to sick me on you. Suthi's cackled. So, you understand that you're little more than a tool? Excellent. You will die as you lived. His lips curled into a snarl, and Nemesis rushed forwards. Suthi's eyes were cruel as she raised her hand. Ania's arrow, obliterate. Nemesis' eyes went wide, and a pure explosion of power erupted onto him. With a loud cry of pain, he was tossed backwards in the strength of the magic. You, Nemesis' voice quivered with rage as he recovered. The damage wasn't too great, nor was it permanent, but she was plenty satisfied to see that she had landed a critical blow. As a magical glyph brewing with flames formed above her head, Suthi's mouth quirked up in a smile. My apologies, Nemesis. You may not be aware of this, but magic is my point of expertise, whereas sword fighting is far more of Byleth's style. If all you sought was a fair fight between sword masters, then perhaps you should have begun without those elites of yours. Nemesis roared, flying into battle. Suthi's laughed, meeting his vigor easily. Hold on, Byleth. Do not fade into the good night without me. Shay laughed uproariously as she cut through a small battalion of soldiers. With a swirling burst of power, she ripped into her awakened form, Agartha and markings covering her body as she leapt back into battle. Taking down Daphnel and Gautier had been easy once she rejoined the main force with the blue lions at her back. Didu and Ash had been overjoyed to see everyone again, and they were all energized and raring to go. The tides had been turned dramatically. 8 of the 10 elites had been defeated, and with a well-timed assault from Ferdinand's forces, the 9th was well on his way to falling. Dominic and Regan were all that remained, even if she couldn't locate Regan anywhere on the battlefield. Dominic was a wyvern lord who was avoiding their attacks admirably, but it wouldn't be too long until he fell. Shay was churning through the very numerous surrounding soldiers. As she fought, however, someone's back touched hers, and she almost involuntarily cut them down. When they remained stationary and not hostile, however, she held tight. Lady Epimenides. It is wondrous to see you once more. Confusion slammed into her senses immediately. Mycen? What in the world are you doing here? It is my duty to ensure your will is met so that Agartha can see the light and experience true freedom once more. To this end, Kronia and I have defeated Regan. What? You guys took down Regan on your own? It made sense, she guessed, considering how much of a pain in the ass the two of them had been in the past, but still. Mycen seemed almost embarrassed when he spoke again. Please have more faith in your servants, Lady Epimenides. We will pave the path you seek to see. I will receive your orders, my lady. Her brain was frazzled. Now was not the time to be doing this. A man, I dunno, go get the rest of the Agarthans from near Shamhala, or something. That has already been done, my lady. She was drawing a blank. Then, you're on standby for a while. The church will be coming this way soon enough, so take everyone and hide and wait until I get back to you. Got it. Understood, my lady. We will await further orders. With a burst of dark magic, Mycen warped, and she was alone yet again. Her eyes scanned the battlefield. There were a lot of high-priority targets. She would need to go help Byleth out with Nemesis as soon as the 10 elites were dead, and if Regan was gone, then that meant that the only one that remained was Dominic. In the distance, she could see the Blue Lions fighting against them. She gave a half-smile at the sight. They fought really well together. It was just that, like always, she was choosing to go it alone. Her eyes snapped to the side as she saw purple in the corner of her vision. There was an Agarthan commander stealthily approaching the kingdom army. She didn't know his name, but she could recognize the use of the tome in his hands. That was something they tried to hit her with earlier. Borex. He was approaching Rodrigue. Panic flared up within her. He was already casting the spell. Desperately, she used the shadow flash, attempting to cross the distance in as short a time as possible. I'm not going to make it. The spell was already flying towards him. She had maybe crossed half the distance towards the mage. Damn it, I just need to be a little bit faster. Desperately, she tried to force a little more speed into her legs, a little more power out of her veins, a little more will out of her soul. It wouldn't be enough. She could tell that it wouldn't be enough. Bur would leave anyone it hit a near-soulless husk. A stray gust of wind would kill you. Even Nemesis wouldn't be immune to it. Rodrigue would likely actually die if she let this go through. I just need a little more time. And then, almost unbidden, she thought of Byleth and his power. When you need it, pour your power into it. It's not a tome, but it'll still grant you power. Everything about what Suthies and I can do will be made clear when you do. Whatever Byleth could do, it let him instantly cross vast distances. Whatever that power was, she needed it immediately. She grabbed the tactics primer at her waist, and she flooded it with magic. And the world became a monochromatic gray as all things slowed to a stop. Shay stared, wide-eyed, for only half a second before she forced energy into her body and kept moving. It seemed that she could still move within this. Everything had gone silent, save for the sound of very distant fighting. Just looking at the situation, she could tell almost immediately what had happened. It's time. Somehow, Suthies has the ability to stop time. She crossed the rest of the distance before her grip on that power faded. With a definitive swing of the sword, she burst apart the Bur spell. It couldn't hurt Rodrigue anymore. A single second after she did, the monochromatic gray exploded into a world of color once more, and the war was on once more. Rodrigue jumped as he turned, noticing her presence. She had already used her shadow flash to reach and cut down the mage as soon as that power faded. My thanks, Shay. She just grunted. No problem. Don't mention it. Just stay alert. There's a lot of enemies out here. Rodrigue gave her a warm smile, and as he did, she saw Dominic fall by his descendant's weapon. Annette stood over her fallen opponent with a victorious smile. She took in a deep breath. I'm gonna go help out Byleth. You all just stay focused on clearing out the army. Understood. Leave it to me, Rodrigue affirmed, and with another use of the shadow flash, she was off. Byleth could hear faint humming. It's time to wake up, Byleth. His mind felt like it was floating. Come, now, do not force me to piece you together myself. Slowly, he felt like something was being roused in him. It's 1,000 laps around the throne for you if you do not awaken immediately. That put a fond sense of worry within him. Wake up immediately. Byleth's eyes snapped open. Right. He was still on the battlefield. Suthies had taken over for him for a time, hadn't she? He felt the same way he did when he was particularly drained of magic. Across from him, Nemesis was more injured than he had been when Byleth lost consciousness. The King of Liberation spat on the ground. Finally turned tail and fled once more. Suthies? Cowards, both goddess and vessel. Neither can face me alone in a fair fight. Byleth breathed in carefully. Physically, he felt better than when he did before he fell asleep. His mind felt more collected, as though he had a light nap. When there's an absence of strength, the only thing that can bridge the gap is tactics. Don't fault us for wishing to survive. Nemesis growled, taking a single step forwards before stopping. Dominic, too. Useless, all of you. Byleth raised his sword, focusing intently. Where Nemesis would strike next, what his next move would be, when to attack, all of those needed to be considered. Nemesis approached with a swift kick off the ground, but it was slow. All things considered, he seemed far weaker than he had been, perhaps half as strong at best. Byleth managed to keep up with his strength and speed with shocking ease, and when he managed to land a glancing blow, blood actually came out of Nemesis' body. The King of Liberation grit his teeth and fought harder, more brutally. For several exchanges, they traded blows, Byleth making sure to avoid as much damage as possible. Nemesis, his strength had dramatically dwindled, but he was still a threat. Still, by the time they separated once more, both of them breathing heavily, Byleth felt confident that he could beat him. The 10 elites are dead, aren't they? Only you remain. The sword of the Creator hung low in Byleth's hands. It was getting to be a chore to keep it upright. I am all that is required to liberate this world. Nemesis responded coldly. Byleth stared at him for a long second, then sighed, shaking his head. This world doesn't need your method of liberation. He raised the sword once more, ready to go into battle again. Before either combatant could move, however, there was the sound of a warp. Byleth glanced to his side. Steady purple eyes gazed back at him. You doing all right out here? Shay's words were calm and teasing. I'm cleaning up. You don't have to be here if you don't want to. In the distance, he could see the Kingdom army fighting as one. Felix led them from the front, with all of the friends that Shay had made supporting him. On their flank, Lawrence led the Federation army with his usual flair, all of his pomp and circumstance seeming to ramp up to 11. From the rear of the battle, Ferdinand led the Empire army to properly surround the Liberation army, cutting down any forces that didn't manage to keep their focus in two directions at once. And deep within the center, Yuri and the Ashen Wolves fought to clear out and undermine the most vital of enemy forces. Byleth had no place among them. This was his role to handle the largest burdens. Shay could return to those she cared about, and he could continue to fight until they were all safe. What are you talking about, man? I want to help you out. Might as well get a good shot in at the King of Liberation at the same time, you know. She rolled her shoulder, and Byleth stared at Nemesis. His lips were curled up into a fierce scowl. I'll win. If you want to fight alongside your friends, you can, he said, deciding to cut straight to the heart of the matter. You got cotton between your ears or something. I said that I wanted to help you, didn't I? I'm not letting you take all the glory for yourself, mister. She snapped at him. Despite feeling thankful in that moment, he couldn't help but feel like he'd been badgered into something that he shouldn't have. You are all pathetic weaklings. You lack the courage and strength to challenge me in lone combat. I will annihilate you all where you stand. Nemesis roared, the dark sword rushing towards them. He allowed his head to drop below the blade, and Shay warped ahead of it. His feet pounded in the dirt as he approached the King of Liberation. Shay roared with laughter as she locked blades with Nemesis. Weaklings. Even if we're weak, who cares? It's because we're weak that we found common ground and helped each other. Nemesis pushed Shay away, landing a firm kick to her midsection. That is the mindset of the meek. Those who are truly strong need no aid. They shall be the ones whom the weak should grovel to. You all disgust me. Byleth met Nemesis' blade as it came down towards Shay. With a grunt of exertion, he forced the much bulkier man into a deadlock. No man is an island. We all have strengths and weaknesses, and we all must work to overcome them alongside others. Failing to acknowledge that makes you no better than the people you lord over. Nemesis landed a solid punch to Byleth's jaw, and he staggered back a few steps. With Shay's timely interruption, he was saved from being skewered. I tire of this. I will ensure that you die here and now. No longer will I tolerate this foolishness. Nemesis' dark creator sword burned with power, and Byleth instinctively understood that he aimed to end this. Byleth knew that he was weaker than Nemesis. It was something that he instinctively understood as a fighter. It wasn't a gap that could be bridged by sheer willpower. In fact, it was exactly as he said: in the absence of strength, only tactics can bridge the gap to victory. He had one final trick up his sleeve. His body was exhausted. His magic reserves were depleted. From the feel of things, he had perhaps a single divine pulse remaining. The chalice of beginnings was even being stretched to its greatest length yet. And yet, there was one more thing he could use. Byleth was the first to approach. Shay followed after him immediately. What's the plan here? It's time to finally make use of your gift. Shay's eyes went wide before she smiled with a feral grin. Ally tactic engaged, twin hopes. Set Byleth and Shay loose on the enemy. Many years from now, historians would say that the final clash that ended the battle for Fodlan's New Dawn was decided in 3 strikes. This was somewhat of an exaggeration. It was decided in 4. Shay met Nemesis' blade with a swift strike, pouring dark magic into the attack. Despite the strength behind it, it wasn't enough to properly block it. Both blades were ripped from her hands, and she staggered back a few steps. Byleth reached Nemesis in the next instant afterwards, striking out towards Nemesis. The man leaned back, avoiding the attack, and he struck outwards towards Byleth. Before Nemesis' strike could land on Byleth's unprotected body, however, the clear sound of a whistle echoed over the battlefield, and Byleth's body vanished, reappearing a scant few steps behind where he had been standing. Nemesis' blade lodged itself in the ground, its target no longer present. He glared at Byleth, and with a proud burst of power, grabbed it with both hands in hopes of pulling it from its earthly prison. Before Nemesis could succeed, however, Shay used her shadow flash to appear before him and, with her blade, resummoned with her power, cut off his right arm. Nemesis' eyes went wide, and his gaze rose to meet Shay's eyes. In that moment, the sublime sword of the Creator extended itself, impaling Nemesis on the blade. And in that moment, all was still. The King of Liberation didn't have a dying breath. No words erupted from his once proud mouth, talking about how he wished them dead. No, all was eerily still and quiet as he fell, collapsing to his knees and beginning to crumble. Like a demonic beast, both him and his men began to flake and fall away from this world. With the blowing of the wind, the only proof that there was ever a battle was the bodies of the fallen and the blood of the brave. It seemed like the world held its breath for a long moment, waiting for a punchline that hadn't arrived yet. And then, with a single cheer, every single soldier, regardless of their place of birth, began to erupt in joyous glee. Byleth was quiet as he sheathed the sword of the Creator and stood back up. An unknown sense of both relief and worry filled him. We did it. Shay's voice was small. We did. Byleth, we did it. You're saying this as though it's a novel concept. Hey, you're just as banged up as me, you know. Don't tell me that you were confident the whole time. She scolded him, even though it was said with a laugh. A small, genuine smile formed on his face. It was far more difficult than expected. But, in the end, we still won, didn't we? Suthies, we did it. Thank you. There was nothing. No response. Suthies. Hey, you don't look all that happy. What's wrong? We just won the war, you know. Shay sighed. I can't hear dash. Are you causing problems again, my vessel? Suthi's voice was distant, as though it were coming through murky waters, or perhaps it sounded like someone was talking to him through a dream. Never mind. Everything's fine. Suthies, are you all right? I am sleepy. Do not bother me. I will awaken, soon, maybe. We shall speak later. You did very well, Byleth. I am proud of you. With that, he could almost feel her presence recede. Right, well, if you're all good, then how about we go celebrate? Bet you Gareg Mach has got the good alcohol, Like, the real good stuff in the basement. Did you know there's a trebuchet in there? Is that so? Yeah, hey, have you already tuned me out? I would never. Well, that's good to hear. Anyways, about that trebuchet, do you think Dash? He had, indeed, already tuned her out. Staring out at the cheering soldiers, he couldn't help but wonder, where would things go from here? Where would Shay go from here? Celebrations at Garreg Mach, Byleth found, were very loud and very, very involved. Numerous times, he'd been swept up into an earnest conversation, or someone pulling him into a bear hug, or someone offering him more and more alcohol that he had to continuously refuse. Eventually, he couldn't handle the attention anymore and found himself out in the entrance hall. How he ended up here, he couldn't say. His feet had simply carried him where he wanted to go, which was about as far from the party as he could get. For a long while, he sat down on the steps and stared down at the doors. Nobody opened them. From behind, he heard footsteps. Hey! What are you doing out here all alone? Everyone was wondering where you went off to. Byleth glanced up, staring at a now familiar concerned look. I wanted to get some air. The party was overwhelming. He responded shortly. Shay let out a short laugh, dropping onto the steps next to him without a hint of grace. Man, you're telling me. I can usually drink with the best of them, but some people there are really knocking it back. Byleth just hummed, reclining his head back. The moment between them was quiet, calm. Almost peaceful. So, why don't you tell me what's actually on your mind, huh? This time, Shay's voice was far more serious. He glanced over at her. She was giving him her full attention, staring at him with her eyebrow creased. What are you going to do now? He asked quietly. She arched her brow. Me? Well, I'm not gonna be able to go back to the Kingdom Army, as much as I'd like to. There's still the issue of the remaining Agarthans who were loyal to Epimenides. I still don't really know what I'm going to do about them, but I have to take responsibility somehow. Besides, if all else falls through, I'm sure one of our friends could use a bodyguard. Why? He didn't hesitate any longer. Come join Geralt's mercenaries. She stared at him, eyes wide. You want me to join you and your dad? Yes. We'll pay you well, if that's what you're concerned about. You, Byleth, why are you asking me this? Her voice had smoothed over into something less surprised and more exasperated. It seemed as though she already knew the answer to the question before she asked. He couldn't meet her eyes. You're strong. I enjoy fighting with you. You're my friend, and I feel that I can entrust my back to you. I've never had someone I can place my faith in like that. These days of traveling and fighting with you have been enjoyable. Far more than any normal job could ever hope to be. And, I still need to bring you to Deirdre. There was an earnest, wistful smile on her face. Hey, bye. When you can say exactly what you mean by that, I'll accept your offer, okay? Until then, I'll keep my schedule open for you. His gaze fell to the floor. He knew what she meant. There were still words he hadn't said, feelings that he hadn't vocalized. Had never known how to vocalize. Shay, I dash. But before he could say what he wished, the doors to the entrance hall slammed open. Both of them almost immediately went into fight or flight mode. They rose to their feet, grabbing the handles of their swords. Marching in through the gates to Garreg Mach was a small detachment of soldiers. He vaguely recognized their equipment Almiran in make. Why they were here, he couldn't say. What he could say, however, was that he recognized the people at the front of the group. Emperor Edelgard von Hresvelg stood beside King Claude von Regen as they made their way into the monastery, and Byleth felt his heart drop as both of them made eye contact with both Shay and himself. Before either of them could make a move to speak, something akin to grim determination settled across Edelgard's features. Shay. I'm not surprised to see you here. Your boldness knows no bounds. Since you've decided to make things easy for me, then I shall do this now. For the crimes of attempted regicide, attempted murder of allied forces, desertion, treason, and espionage, among numerous others, you shall be placed under arrest immediately. Please do not resist. Something akin to static had filled his brain. Dimly, he was aware of Claude staring up at them with a glum but level look, and he was aware of Rhea, unconscious on the back of his wyvern. Shay was staring at Edelgard with a panicked look. She hadn't responded. Edelgard had already unsheathed her axe and was approaching. He needed to remedy this situation, somehow. Reasoning with her wouldn't work. Edelgard had clearly seen that he was alive and well. She likely knew that if Shay was here, then she helped them take out Nemesis. Even those two facts weren't enough to dissuade her. He needed leverage. And there was only one single point that he could lean on. One that was enough to act as a fulcrum to stop her where she stood. Edelgard. You owe me money. Emperor Edelgard halted in her tracks, staring up at him with abject confusion. Excuse me. Even Shay was staring at him. He continued on. You've dodged your attempts at paying your dues multiple times. Geralt's mercenaries do not take kindly to being swindled. If I am not paid immediately, then I will consider it an act of aggression. An act of this woman is a member of the Agarthants. Byleth Eisner, if you do not stand aside, then you will be complicit in her crimes. His eyes darkened. If you are willing to continue this war of yours, then so be it. And without another word, he unsheathed the sword of the Creator, exposing it to the whole world to see. The sword wrapped itself around his arm, exposing his true ownership of it to all. Both Edelgard and Claude breathed in sharp breaths, although both were for different reasons. A flash of panic was on Edelgard's face, whereas Claude, he looked hungry. From just a glance, Byleth could tell that Claude wanted this blade. Edelgard's expression was foul as she stared up at him. What are your conditions? A sharp smile formed on his face. You paid half the payment for attacking Arianrod up front, however, you never paid the other half. With nearly a year's worth of interest, the amount you owe has risen considerably. When you add in the numerous extra jobs we have performed without pay in service to your cause, the total amount comes out to 1 million gold. Edelgard had a thunderous look on her face, and it wasn't hard to tell why. 1 million was the bounty for capturing Shay dead or alive. It was an amount that the Empire was capable of paying, but no small group would be able to pay that with merely pocket change, regardless of how rich they were. And, as he said, if they didn't pay immediately, then he would consider it an act of aggression. Considering the sway he held over the church and the fact that they were likely closing in on the monastery as they spoke, he had her cornered. One day. Byleth tilted his head. Elaborate. Edelgard was gritting her teeth as she spoke. I'll give her 1 day. 1 day to leave. When the sun rises, she must be gone. After that, all bets are off and my debt to you is resolved. Until then, we won't bother her. Do we have a deal? Staring at Edelgard's face, he could tell that this was the best deal she was willing to offer. 1 day was an exaggeration for what she was offering, it was a few hours at most. However, he hadn't been expecting her to offer something like this in the first place. He glanced at Shay. She seemed much calmer, if not somewhat sad, and when she spoke, it was with a quiet, somber tone. Hey, bye. You should go ahead and take the deal. He cocked his head. I can push for more. She just sighed. No, it's fine. I'm okay with this. Besides, 1 day is plenty of time. It's not like we'll never see each other again, either. Byleth frowned. But dash. Hey. No buts. There's something else I need to take care of, remember? I have a promise to fulfill. Don't worry, I'll come find you. Oh, and to pay you back for this, I'll pay for everything when we go to Deirdre, got it? For a long moment, he just stared at her, trying to find another way out of this. But, from the look on her face, it seemed that she was sincere and determined. Very well. Go say your goodbyes to your friends as quickly as you can. You don't have much time. I'll miss you too, you know. He didn't respond, the entrance hall filled with nothing but tense silence. Then, after a long moment, he raised his head towards Edelgard. I accept your conditions, Edelgard. Shay will leave before sunrise. In exchange, all debts between Adrestia and Geralt's mercenaries will be resolved. Without another word, he spun on his heel and began to walk out of the entrance hall, heading back towards the life of the party. Shay was at his heels. "Hey, bye. What is it?" "Thanks." Of course. They had helped each other time and time again. It only made sense that he would help her with something like this. He truly did wish to see her again. When he did, he hoped to be able to say the words he wasn't able to today, and figure out what it was he wanted. Until that day, he could only see her off and wish her well. Edelgard let out a long sigh as she walked outside of the ballroom, where the majority of the festivities had been taking place. She hadn't been able to detain Shay for what she had done. Regardless of what the others said, the mercenary was both a flight risk and a ticking time bomb. If she lost control again, or even if that Agar then was merely masquerading as Shay, then the progress they all fought so hard for, the world they all shed blood to reach, could be in real, genuine jeopardy. But, immediately launching into another conflict, especially with one as strong as the Ashen Demon and the weight that came with the Sword of the Creator, could just as easily spell doom for her. Merely an hour after she returned to the monastery, the knights returned as well, which would have been dramatically difficult to defeat in her current state. If she died, then all of her efforts would be for naught. If she were the aggressor to someone who may be vaunted as a war hero, then she would undoubtedly lose face among the people with whom she needed to retain it at all costs. All she could do was do her best to guarantee that the search could be as narrow as possible. "Hey. I need to talk to you." Edelgard turned her head. Felix was standing there, his arms crossed with his usual scowl on his face. "Was there something you needed, Felix?" He scoffed. "You aren't stupid. I think you can guess." She tilted her head, a small smile growing on her face. "You've come to ask about the kingdom, correct?" "I'm not here to ask anything, I'm here to tell you something." With a sigh, Edelgard knit her eyebrows together. "You're as impossible as ever, Duke Frildarius." When Felix's scowl deepened at the title, she could only feel a splash of vindictive glee. "Hey. Hear me out before you get snarky." She shook her head mirthlessly. "Very well, then. What is it you wish to tell me?" For a long moment, both of them were quiet. Felix didn't say anything, just staring at her. His eyes seemed to reflect nothing, his emotions hidden and blank. "I detest the war you created. It turned out well for us and for the future, but too many people lost far too much for me to be happy about it. It was hasty, reckless, and harebrained, and if I could go back in time, I would beat the shit out of you before any of this ever happened. That being said, it's hard for me to disagree with the points you've made. Just as I detest your war, I equally detest the knighthood that's taken so many people's lives for nothing. As for the crests, do you really think someone like me should have become duke to start with?" Felix spread his arms, gesturing to himself, and Edelgard just stared at him in shell-shocked silence for a moment. "I was under the impression that it was me that you despised." She needled him somewhat. The creasing of his eyes proved how effective that technique was. "I do hate you. If not for your stupid war, then Dmitri would be alive and well. It's because of you that he's dead now. But I also know how the boar was." He would hear the voices of the dead, muttering to himself alone in the dark. He was barely there even on a good day. "I hate you because it's easy to hate you. And yet, I'm still here talking to you. I won't apologize for what I've done, but I will express remorse for the outcome. I wanted to lose him as little as you did." Felix stared at her, exasperated, then let out a sigh. He was doing it quite often during this conversation. "You're just as single-minded as he was. It's getting harder and harder to tell who influenced who." She let out a short laugh. "Is it impossible to say that we influenced each other equally? Who knows? Can't exactly go asking him, now, can we?" The pair were silent for a long moment as she recovered from the thinly veiled barb he sent her way. "Felix. Why did you search me out?" He glanced at her, his eyes a torn mix between baleful and remorseful. "I lost a brother once, too. I don't know what he would do in my shoes. It's getting harder and harder to imagine that. If Glenn were here and alive instead of me, what would he do? It pisses me off the longer I draw a blank on that question." He had a frustrated look on his face, and Edelgard sighed. Honestly, Men from Faerghus had their ways of being emotionally stunted. Perhaps it was something in the air. What is it that you want to do from here on out, Felix? You can choose your own path forward. The life you live is only yours alone, so you ought to live it wholly and completely. That's the future we've fought so hard to earn, so you should grasp it with your own hands. Amber eyes stared at her with an intense gaze. You really think that's smart to say to someone who just told you that he hated you? I don't believe you'll kill me. As much as you would like to pretend otherwise, you care for your land and your friends far too much to abandon them via regicide. From the sounds of it, that's the way you've always been, Felix. TCH, he tsked, turning his gaze away from her. With a small grin, she continued on. What will you do from here on, I wonder? Will you remain as Duke? If you are a lacking ruler, then you may find your position in jeopardy. Felix was quiet for a long moment. I'd expect nothing less from you. That's the way things should be, isn't it? I'm sick and tired of dealing with idiotic nobles who lean on their crests or their money too much. I'm glad to find that we are finally in agreement. Felix glared at her, then. Edelgard. Let me make something clear. I do despise you. You, and your actions, have caused countless people to suffer and countless lives to be lost, even if it was for the greater good. But, you're capable, at the very least. You're strong enough to make all the bullshit you spout seem possible. You did good bringing back Rhea, too, even if you immediately fumbled when you kicked out Shay. For now, I'll follow your lead, but if you ever do something even remotely like that fake emperor that was on the throne did, then I'll cut you down myself. Do you understand? Slowly, a small, true grin formed on Edelgard's face. It seemed that she had managed to win his respect after all, skewed though it was. I understand perfectly, Felix. Thank you for continuing to support me. TCH. You've got a really damn annoying look on your face. If you keep talking like that, I won't wait for you to mess up, got it? Instantly, Edelgard schooled her face back into a normal expression. Understood. Was there anything else you needed from me, Duke Frildarius? He wrinkled his nose. That's somehow worse. Just be normal, for crying out loud. There was something else, though. Claude wanted to talk to you. No idea why he asked me to tell you, but he's waiting up in the Goddess Tower. If I have to hear anything weird about what you two do up there, I'll kill both of you. Claude? In the Goddess Tower? Why would he want to call me there? Without waiting for a response, Felix stalked back into the party. Troubled, Edelgard shook her head, heading away from him and towards the imposing build. Unbeknownst to either of them, in the shadows of the building, a darkly armored form slipped away into the night. The steps up the Goddess Tower were tall, she noted. Not once had Edelgard ever been in this building. She had simply seen no need for it. There was no one she wished to share that experience with. There was no spark of romance, no burning passions, no fleeting loves, even if her father encouraged her to explore and socialize. Her days at the academy, short though they were filled with anxiety and planning. So, she wondered, for what reason would Claude call her up here? If he was about to propose, then he would be sorely mistaken on the type of relationship that they had built. She climbed the final step of the tower, finally reaching the top. Up here, she could hear the chirping of the birds very distantly. Standing against the balcony, staring off towards the horizon, was Claude. The sun was beginning to bleed through the dark of the night, a very dim orange lighting up the first expanse of clouds on that horizon line. As her heels clacked against the ground, he turned to greet her, giving her a smile. Hey, Edelgard. You actually came, huh? She snorted. Of course I did. You sent Felix of all people to invite me here. If you had the guts for that, you likely could have done it yourself. Well, I figured he was heading your way anyway, so I decided to kill two birds with one stone. And why did you call me up here, Claude? At that, he looked back out over the balcony. It's been a long few years, Edelgard. Do you remember some of the legends about this place? You know, they say that if a man and a woman pray for the same thing here, on that night, the goddess will grant their wish. Edelgard walked a few steps closer, staring out over the same view that he was looking at. Soon, the sun would rise. And what wish did you want to make? Slowly, Claude leaned forwards, resting his head in his hand. You know, after all this time, we really don't know much of anything about each other, do we? Right now, there's an impenetrable wall between us. Wouldn't you agree? He was talking about something far, far more than just what his words meant from the outset. Edelgard didn't know the point he was trying to make just yet. I can't say either way. We've fought together, and we've experienced many ordeals together, but challenges do not build a bond, they only test it. He let out a short laugh. Exactly the kind of answer I expected from you, Edelgard. You're right, in every sense of the word. We know nothing about each other. Two people can never connect without reaching out to each other. I was stupid. I thought that part was obvious, but it's so much harder to accomplish than I thought. Plaintively, without saying a word, Edelgard extended an open palm across the distance between them. At her silence, he turned to her, his eyes going wide when he saw her outstretched hand. His voice was shaky as he let out a laugh. Hey, what do you think you're doing? I'm offering you a hand. You said that two people can never connect without reaching out to each other, so I'm choosing to reach out. She said firmly, staring at Claude and waiting for his reaction. Slowly, he ran a hand down his face. That's not, Maybe it is that easy. Hey, Edelgard. I'm going to ask you this up front. What's your plan for Lester? And don't lie to me, I can sniff that out a lot better than you can imagine. Her arm fell back down to her side as she frowned at Claude. I want to reach peace with you. We ought to do that much, shouldn't we? And what about your whole plan, Where does Lester slot into it? Are you just going to let us walk free with a peace treaty and call it a day? I know you didn't fight that hard just to let your new idealized world slip from your grasp. She met his gaze with equal intensity. No, I won't let it slip away just like that. Claude, you are a reasonable and just man. Time and time again, we have relied on each other. I feel I can trust your heart, even if I can't trust your words. That is why I know that you and I have goals that don't have to conflict. I will always try to convince you to understand, if not accept, my point of view. But that's why people have handshakes, is it not? It's an agreement, a mutual will to understand and provide for each other. I'm sure that the world you want to build will be just as bright as the one I wish to build. If we work together, however, I think we can make something far better than the sum of the whole. Claude was silent, staring at her with wide eyes. You're, Again and again with you people, I swear. Somehow, you always manage to find just the right words at just the right time. More and more rays of orange were beginning to break through the horizon. I'm not choosing my words carefully, nor am I attempting to persuade you of anything. I'm speaking as earnestly as I can. If we are to communicate, if we are to bring peace, then we must be sincere with each other. I'm aware that I'm not perfect. My goals and my ambitions are an easy point of contention for many, and my future may very well be impossible if I am not up to the task. But the future cannot be built by one person alone, even I don't have the strength necessary. I wish to walk hand in hand with as many people as I can, and prevent bloodshed wherever possible. She turned back to Claude, allowing the quiet determination that had slowly been filling her to show on her face. He couldn't meet her eyes. Being earnest? A guy like me? Come on, your queenliness, you shouldn't expect something like that from a rogue like me. She grit her teeth. Again and again, Claude would act like this. Constantly deflecting whenever he saw resistance or when he panicked, constantly trying to play up the act of being a cool, suave rogue whenever he thought the act would fit him. The only way through that act was with a full frontal assault. Once more, she raised her hand as an open invitation, and spoke. I trust you, Claude. So please, trust in me. Without saying a word, Claude tore his eyes away from her and stared out towards the horizon. She couldn't help but feel frustrated as she was forced to lower her arm once more. It was a long, tense moment before Claude spoke again. I had a surefire plan to beat you, you know. She blinked, taken aback. What? You just said that you trusted me, right? That's a bad decision. I had a plan that could absolutely, with complete certainty, end in the defeat of both the Empire and you. It was foolproof. His voice was level as he warned her, but he could finally meet her eyes again. You, Claude, what are you trying to pull? I know that you're not one to share your plans with an enemy. She growled, annoyed. He gave her a teasing smile, standing back up to full and meeting her gaze head-on. Yep. You got that right. There's no way I'm giving you any details, for both of our sakes. I'll keep that one in my back pocket for now, so don't you worry about it, okay? With a long groan, she massaged her temple. I'm finding it hard to ignore as it is. Claude let out a short laugh, the sound of it fake in their isolated space. Hey, I bet you're wondering why I even bothered telling you this, right? It seemed rude to ask. Sheesh, and here I thought we were best buds. You can be rude to your friends, Edelgard. This time, his laugh seemed a bit more real. She just stared at him flatly. Did you not just tell me that you created a plan to eliminate me? Details. Besides the pesky small stuff that nobody cares about like semantics though, there is, actually a reason I wanted to tell you. She raised an eyebrow. And what is that? That world that you said you wanted to make. How confident are you in it? How confident am I in it? In what way? Do you think you'll really pull it off? Exasperated, she huffed at him. Did I not already tell you that I wished for your help to make it better? That's different. You've been fighting all this time for that future. If I left you to your own devices, do you think you would be able to do something unprecedented? Of course. If we all work towards a future where we can live lives of our own choosing, where we can all be free to choose our own path forwards, then, that would make me happy. Even if I can only reach a fraction of that goal, I think I could be satisfied. And so you're getting rid of the crest system, right? But what are you doing about the kingdom? The kingdom, she knew she wouldn't be the ideal ruler that Faerghus needed. Someone who couldn't dedicate their time to their people would never be an effective ruler. The solution to that is simple. As much as I would wish it to be so, it simply isn't feasible to rule over the kingdom with a strong, solitary fist. So long as the crest system is done away with and the central church's strangling dogma is discarded along with it, I'll grant the previous kingdom commanders full control over their lands with only a small tax for the empire. Claude whistled. You don't want to unify Fodlan? You're in the prime position to do it, you know, get everyone flying under one banner. Slowly, Edelgard shook her head. Even if the names and borders change, the hearts of the people will remain the same. Faerghus will remain Faerghus, Leicester will remain Leicester, and Adrestia will remain Adrestia. Even broken and battered, that will is far from stagnant. There's no need for something such as control over all of Fodlan, so long as my future can be enacted. She knew that she wouldn't succumb to that power, but Fodlan was impossibly large and its reaches impossibly vast. To have control over such a land, rife with secrets and blood and power, perhaps the best course of action to avoid falling into the same pitfalls as Rhea was to simply allow all of Fodlan to continue on as it was. 3 nations, 3 houses, all allowing for their own identity. That's a really mature stance from you, Edelgard. To be honest, I wasn't expecting something like that. Makes me feel better for what I'm about to do, Claude said cheerily. She turned to face him properly. Excuse me. He stared at her, and with a completely earnest smile, said, I'm going to leave Leicester in your capable hands. Take care of her, okay? For a long moment, she was silent. Claude, did you listen to what I just said? I only feel comfortable with that because I listened. Anyone else and I would hesitate. It's because it's you, and that stupidly strong will of yours, that I'm completely okay with letting you handle things for now. Claude, you can't just give a nation away. Why not? I'm doing it right now. There are procedures for this, you ignorant man. You've got that covered, right? Just make Lawrence do it all. That gave her pause. It was perhaps the most intelligent thing that Claude had said to her all day. Perhaps I will. That, however, does not excuse you from this. Why are you bothering to do this? Claude stared out at the horizon once more. The sun hadn't peeked through the clouds yet. For all intents and purposes, it remained night time. The light, however, was slowly starting to build. Edelgard. Haven't you wondered why I had the pull to drag Nader over to my side at Fodlan's throat? Why I had a detachment of foreign soldiers with foreign weapons? Come on, I know you're curious. Go on, you can ask away. I promise to answer with complete sincerity. Exasperated, she glared at him. He returned it with a cheeky smile. With all of the factors floating around Claude combined with the fact that he proposed such a thing, there was truly only one believable outcome. You're foreign royalty, aren't you? It would explain so much his adversity to sharing information about himself, his fixation of overcoming the walls between them, and his perpetually sun-kissed skin. His grin grew softer, and his tone with it. Got it in one. Right now, you're speaking to King Khalid of Almeria. King Khalid? Of Almira? He must have noticed the look on her face. That business I needed to take care of revolved around me returning home to take a retainer, the dude in the armor. The old man forced me to accept the crown while I was there, even if it was a bit early for me. Khalid, she tried hesitantly, testing out the name on her tongue. He turned to her with a small, but earnest look on his face. Hey, no need to force yourself. If you want to call me Claude, feel free. I encourage it. Nobody's called me Khalid outside of home, and to be honest, it'll probably be weird if you started now. If there's anything that should stay the same, it's that, even if it's only just for now. Claude, then. She decided. Perhaps there would come a day when she could call him by name, when he felt comfortable enough with both it and her to allow it. Claude's smile grew somewhat at the sight of her. Hey, Edelgard. You asked me what my wish would be, right? Cautiously, she stared out at the horizon with him. That I did. If I could wish for anything, I would wish for the ability to tear down the walls that exist between people. We've fought each other senselessly for so long, and I'm not just talking about Almira and Fodlan. The imaginary lines in the sand have divided people since the dawn of time. It sounds stupid, but I want all people to be able to meet each other and share ideas, thoughts, and feelings and words and cultures. But, I can't do that from here. There's so much that needs to be done, so many injustices that need to first be resolved before I can even begin to build that future. Talking with Cyril made me realize that. When I've settled everything in Almira, I'll come back, and together, we'll build a better world. One where people won't be divided based on their place of birth, where they can succeed by their own efforts and follow the future that they choose. Where they can reach out their hands and have others reach out theirs in turn. The earliest rays of dawn were brilliant in his vibrant green eyes. With a determined set to his jaw, Claude extended his hand. A grin was forming on her face. This is the future I'm aiming for. Edelgard met him halfway and grasped his hand. I wish for much the same. Far above, the blue sea star twinkled on. And with it, the sun broke over the horizon, and a brilliant light settled over the land. If the goddess could hear their earnest wish, then perhaps it just might come true. But until then, they would work ceaselessly to make such a dream into reality, side by side. Ally tactic engaged, an everlasting flame. Create a new dawn for all of Fodlan. Chapter 23, An Everlasting Flame. Epilogue. Beyond the horizon. The Millennium Festival was in full swing at Garreg Mach, and with it came a bountiful celebration. The monastery had been fully rebuilt and made operational again. Although Ria was no longer the figurehead that she once was, it was still a place of worship for many of the people within Fodlan, and it remained operational as a school, although it had become far more open to commoners. On such a historic day for a historic place, it was only right that the greatest powers within the continent had gathered. All of those who could spare a day to be away from their duties had arrived. Friends new and old were walking the bustling streets, and although it had only been little more than a year and a half since the end of the war, there was a noticeable difference in the previous generals and commanders who had fought in it. Some had been burdened by the war itself. Many had hung up their blades for good, while some continued to fight, be it against roaming brigands past the end of the war, or against an enemy that continued to lurk in the shadows. Emperor Edelgard was one of the latter to this day. She chased after the remnants of the Agarthans that plagued the Fodlan. With the public being made aware of their existence and crimes, support for her was at an all-time high throughout the lands. Faerghus had settled somewhat with the passage of time, in no small part thanks to Emperor Edelgard's minimal influence in their affairs. With no Adrestian banners flown and the traditional Faerghus way of life still intact, it was easy for the common folk to forget who held the crown. Although the nobles of Faerghus remained sour to the idea of Edelgard holding their leash, they had no choice but to relent. The emperor, however, still received assassins frequently, all of whom were held off by her two most trusted friends. Thanks to the skilled leadership of King Dimitri and Commander Shay during the war, an unprecedented amount of lives had been spared, although there were still many who felt the weight of their losses. Without the restrictive weight of the previously intact crest system, however, those who were truly competent could help pull their country forwards within these turbulent days. Leicester had been dissolved from a federation back into an alliance once more, although with Lawrence Gloucester's immaculate grasp of the politics of the Round Table, it soon became clear who could call the shots among them. Duke Regan's seat remained notoriously empty, and despite Emperor Edelgard's gentle insistence that it be filled even temporarily, no one had proven to be even half the leader that Claude von Regan had proven to be in the past. Thus, with little complaint, the seat remained untouched. Leicester itself also heavily benefited from the lack of a crest system, allowing a meteoric rise in power from the common people, with many previously unnoticed merchant families becoming economic powerhouses seemingly overnight. For now, however, the region had settled into a turbulent peace, content with the fact that they were allowed to exist as an independent nation at all. Rebuilding efforts in Adrestia were consuming much of the empire's already limited resources. They had been heavily burdened by the war, with many of their available resources being rapidly depleted by poor leadership or internal sabotage. Wrangling the nobles of the empire had been Emperor Edelgard's first action, and ensuring that they couldn't do more damage than had already been dealt was necessary. Had another sovereign nation chosen to attack Adrestia directly after the war ended, it would not have been able to survive the assault without the aid of Leicester or Faerghus. The capital city of Inver suffered the most damage by far, and efforts to rebuild it were still ongoing even today. When it came to the effects of the crest system being removed, well, many members of the Black Eagle strike force had been crestless. Under their skilled leadership, the empire recovered rapidly, and with Emperor Edelgard's watchful eye, the quality of life among the common folk improved dramatically. In all three regions, public education caught on and flourished. While not much time had passed since its implementation, it was already starting to show some results. The ability to read and write was one of the first barriers to cross in order to achieve a more educated nation, and it was instrumental in teaching the masses to think and learn for themselves. Criminal sentences had been lowered, the severity of the punishment now matching the severity of the crime far more smoothly, and there were far more options for reform available for those who committed a crime that wasn't insidious in nature. After all, would a truly evil person steal medicine to care for a sick loved one? Did they truly deserve to have a hand removed for that crime? King Dimitri's wish had been to uplift the weak in those manners, and Emperor Edelgard followed through on that wish splendidly. That did not mean, however, that all things had been going well with time. While the public had a generally positive outlook on the removal of the crest system, the overarching nobility did not. Many were attempting to strangle the empire with economic sanctions and tariffs on one side, and inciting banditry and riots on another. Although Emperor Edelgard technically held control of all of Fodlan, she couldn't press too hard on any individual noble, or they would soon be cries of oppression that would sweep every region across Fodlan. All she could do was grit her teeth, take preemptive action as much as possible, and try her best to limit what her enemies could accomplish. To that end, a certain group which had resided beneath Gareg Mach was especially useful. The Ashen Wolves and the members of Abyss were excellent at solving problems that the Emperor wasn't capable of solving herself, albeit always with a steep fee. They were no longer being forced to be confined beneath Gareg Mach, although many chose to do so anyways, much to the Emperor's bafflement. Having no personal quarrel with any of them and no way to ensure that she could capture any criminals if she did decide to invade, she allowed them all their peace, so long as they ensured that they wouldn't bring any direct harm to her or the people. Trade with other nations had flourished, and it was perhaps the biggest contributor to a swift recovery within the empire. Thanks to close ties between the leader of Almira and the leader of Fodlan, the two nations reached peace. Culture was slowly exchanged, and although the hearts of men can't be changed in a single day, they can change slowly. Thanks to Duke Goneril and Nader the Undefeatable's newfound brotherhood in arms, that process was expedited immensely. Goods, technologies, and ideas were being sent across the borders, and both sides benefited immensely, even if the enmity between the two nations had not yet been resolved. Other nations, however, were less accepting of this ideal. Sreng and Faergus remained locked in war, and Brigid remained wary of the empire, despite Queen Macniary's fervent attempts to convince them otherwise. The Church of Syros had taken a steep decline in power. Rhea had acquiesced with many, if not all, of Emperor Edelgard's demands, scaling back the strength of both the Knights of Syros and the ruling power given by the faith. The Central Church had, in essence, reached the same level of power as the Southern and Western churches, which was the ultimate goal that the Emperor decided upon after taking back her throne. The faith remained, however, and those who practiced it were happy. Those who benefited from its power were less so, but that was to be expected. The Church of Syros had become what it was supposed to be from the very beginning, a guiding light, not a hand that dragged you where it wanted. Emperor Edelgard felt that the goddess would have been pleased with the direction it had taken. That leads us to today, the day of the Millennium Festival. Yo! It's been a while, huh, Edelgard? I heard through the grapevine that Rhea was stepping down today. Who knew, huh? Certainly not me. Good thing, too. I was about to send you a series of vaguely intimidating and passive-aggressive letters until you did something about it. Anyways, that's not why I'm writing to you today. Figured we should meet up again, for old time's sake. Haven't spoken face to face since the day the war ended, right? Might as well remedy that since I'm back in town for a bit for the festival. Come to the war room in the monastery alone after the big announcement is over with. I've got something good to show you. And I mean it when I say to come alone, got it? Don't even bring that creepy shadow of yours. Consider it a matter of national security. Hope to see you. Khalid. My lady, I must protest this idea. Hubert, her ever-present, creepy shadow, said over Edelgard's shoulder. Even though he was well aware of Claude's true identity, Hubert was still wary of the man even now. She just sighed. If Claude ever wished to betray me, he would have done so by now. While I must admit this seems sketchy at best, he is someone I can take at his word. Besides, I doubt there is any member of the Agarthans remaining who are experienced enough to both mimic his manner of speech, handwriting, and looks while also being able to kill me. I will be fine, Hubert. His scowl remained. I am to be by your side at all times, my lady. You have already been attacked multiple times this moon. I cannot allow you to come under harm. Hubert, I am your emperor. As much as I do not wish to force you to allow me to make my own decisions, I shall do so if necessary. If I wish to be alone for a short period of time, then I shall be. Am I understood? At her glare, he was forced to acquiesce. Perfectly, my lady. With that, her sharp look faded. Excellent. Don't worry, Hubert. I'd received word that Ferdinand is here as well, and looking for you as well. I imagine the two of you can entertain each other quite well, no? Hubert, her ever unflappable vassal, did not so much as flinch at the implication, but he noticeably could not meet her eyes. I imagine that is so, my lady. With a satisfied hum, she began to walk off. Hubert followed after her for the moment. Edelgard and Hubert had been hosted by the church for the last few days. She and Rhea had held extensive talks about the future of the church and the direction it would take in the future. It was a far cry from the initial inability to communicate that the two originally held. When they traveled within a fragile coalition, strung together by Dimitri's plans, the pair had never even been able to look at each other, let alone discuss their ideals. Now, although there was still a lingering air of resentment, they were able to speak to one another and exchange ideas. For what it was worth, Rhea wasn't simply following along and agreeing with whatever Edelgard said out of force. The pair did genuinely bicker quite often, both of them having their own struggles to understand the ideals of the other. In the end, however, they managed to limp across the finish line to reach a conclusion. With Claude's proposal in mind, Edelgard and Hubert stepped out into the streets to enjoy the festivities. Strangely enough, the first person they ran into was Duke Frildarius. Edelgard hadn't expected him to attend the event. She hadn't heard much from Felix at all, with their only point of contact being semi-regular letters about the state of affairs within Faerghus and legislation that he wanted her to pass, most of which she approved. The letters had been cold, without a shred of warmth of personal touches to them. His friends were much more open. For example, Ingrid had invited Edelgard to her and Sylvain's wedding, although she had unfortunately been unable to attend due to an outbreak of bandit activity within the Empire, choosing to send a small wedding gift to the pair instead. It seemed that, although Ingrid still did not accept Edelgard as queen, she was at least willing enough to accept her as a friend. With Felix, the reverse seemed to shine true. "Ah, Duke Frildarius, it's good to see you," Edelgard commented. Felix grunted. "Could have gone without seeing you, but I suppose it's inevitable." "Did you need something from me?" he asked, making no secret of his rude tone. "I merely wanted to check in with you. You and I haven't properly spoken in quite some time, so I was wondering how you've been doing," she responded lightly. Felix crossed his arms, and her eyes were immediately drawn to a glimmer of light from his hand. "I'm fine. Since there's nothing else you needed, I'll be dash." "Felix." A familiar voice cried over the crowd, and a smirk grew on Edelgard's face at the look of dread on his face. A familiar bob of red hair burst through the crowd, panting as she reached Felix's side. "You mean it? You went and left me all on my own again. Why did you? Oh. Hello, Emperor Edelgard." Annette, wearing a matching ring to the one around Felix's hand, bowed, and suddenly, everything was clear to her. "He didn't want me to know about their engagement, But why, I wonder?" "Good day to you too, Annette. It's good to see that the two of you are well. Should I be referring to you as Duchess Frildarius now?" She had to fight to hold back a laugh as Annette went beet red. No, I dash." With a sigh, Felix stepped in. "I only proposed a month ago. Don't get too ahead of yourself. We're still working everything out." At her side, Hubert let out a mirthful laugh that would sound sinister to anyone else but her. "With how repressed you are, I'm surprised you worked up the courage to say anything at all." "Quite impressive." Despite the nature of his words, she knew that it was just Hubert's way of congratulating them. Felix may have also known, although it was impossible to tell, given how the scowl he wore was permanent and didn't seem capable of deepening. Annette, however, did not. Hey. I'll have you know that Felix was quite the gentleman. He took me out on a romantic date, and he bought me all these lovely flowers, and dash." Felix cut in before she could ramble on any further, saying, "All right, enough, I don't think they heard you in Almira. Let's just leave it at that, shall we? I don't think they need the whole story." But with that, Edelgard had already heard everything she needed to. A small, genuine smile had formed on her face. "He's embarrassed. He's spent so long building up his image of a stoic swordsman, and if his wife talks about his proposal for more than a minute, it'll crumble instantly. Good luck, Felix." Annette pouted at her refuted story, but she shook her head. "All right, fine. But I still have to thank you, Lady Edelgard. Without your help, merci, and I wouldn't have been able to open up a shop in Fhirdiad. So, thank you." Edelgard shook her head. "Of course. You did so much to help out the war effort that it felt impossible not to grant that much. How's business?" Annette perked up. "Oh, it's going great. Merci stayed behind in Fhirdiad to keep the store running today, since a lot of people are celebrating over there too. Didu and Emile are still there with her. We've been baking sweets and treats, a lot of them native to Duscur. We've been getting a lot of customers, and I was worried about the shop since I was coming here, but they told me that everything would be fine, so." Edelgard nodded understandingly. She had both heard and expected that Jaritza would stay with Mercedes. "The restoration of Duscur, how does that fare?" Felix was the one to respond. "Well enough. Since we exposed how the Agarthans orchestrated the tragedy, there's no real reason for people to hate them anymore. It's been slow, but they have something resembling infrastructure now. It had only been a little over a year and a half since the end of the war. It would be difficult to expect a large, sweeping change like with the rest of the world. There was still resentment between the people of Dusker and the rest of Faerghus, but she had taken steps to ensure that they would at least get the peace they had earned. Excellent. I'm happy for both of you both in your efforts and for your coming marriage. Please send me an invitation for the reception. Felix snorted just as Annette cheered. The wife, however, was the first to barge forward. Of course. You probably won't be a bridesmaid, sorry about that, but I'd be happy to have you there. Felix rolled his eyes. I'll see if I remember to put your name on the list. Annette swatted at his arm, but he remained immovable as ever. Edelgard couldn't help but laugh, covering her mouth so as to not let the noise slip and offend the already surly man. Thank you for your thoughtfulness, Felix. I shouldn't hope to take up too much of your time. Enjoy the festivities, you two. As she turned to leave, however, Felix called out one final time. Hey, Edelgard. She turned, giving him an inquisitive look. He seemed to struggle with his words for a long moment before deciding what to say. You're doing good so far. Keep it up. A soft smile crossed her face. Of course. With barely more than a nod to each other, the two pairs went in different directions, although Edelgard could still hear Annette talking excitedly as they walked away despite the noise of the crowd. In a world such as this, it was nice to know that people who could very well consider her an enemy would be willing to cooperate with her. Felix Hugo Frildarius, he was very well within his rights to kill her if he so wished, all those moons ago, and yet, he had chosen to trust in her today. In fact, all of the Blue Lions could have easily chosen to hate her. And yet, all of them had chosen the path to peace. Each of them had chosen to make the world better in their own way, instead of clinging to hatred. In the aftermath of that conversation, there should have been only one Blue Lion still unaccounted for, Ash. Well, he would be unaccounted for, if not for persistent messages she'd been receiving from Brigid. Seems like you really did take that boy from the kingdom home, Petra? Dorothea was doing a stage play in the middle of the town square. Edelgard watched, pride in her eyes, as they reenacted the final battle at Inver. While it obviously wasn't a one-to-one recreation, and the monster that the hegemon had been was replaced with a simple recreation of the former Duke Aegir, the rest was incredibly accurate. Dorothea, in a white wig, played the role of Edelgard, and a myriad of supporting actors around them played the role of the Black Eagles. Playing Dorothea's own role was Manuela, amusingly enough. Perhaps it was better to have Dorothea play out the more intensive parts than have a less skilled actor take the stage as Edelgard. Backstage, she knew that Hanneman was working several of the magical tools and moving parts that made the play possible. Him and Manuela had been working together for quite some time now, especially given that they were trapped in Inver for a time. Watching the play from afar were another pair of familiar faces, however. Edelgard made no moves to hide her presence as she approached, Hubert trailing after her the whole time. Oh, hey, it's Edelgard. Look, Ignatz. Raphael stood over Ignatz's shoulder as the artist painted a picture of the play. He seemed to be trying to recreate a striking image of Edelgard as she fought against Aegir. Ignatz humored him, looking up. How can we help you, Lady Edelgard? I was merely looking to catch up. How have you two been? In truth, she didn't get to know a few members of the Golden Deer well until Claude handed her the reins to Lester. From there, she worked in close contact with several of them, although the two before her were isolated compared to some of the rest. We've been well. I'm working with Raphael at his family inn for the moment. I'm hoping to sell a few pieces of my work while I'm here. Ignatz responded, focusing back on his painting. Yeah, Ignatz is a real big help around the house. My sister really likes him, too. It's like having a little brother around. Ignatz blushed at Raphael's comment, and Edelgard couldn't stop herself from raising an eyebrow. Raphael's sister likes Ignatz. And from the looks of it, the feeling might be mutual. She's a very talented artist, is all, and I've been showing her how to paint well, and dash. You don't need to justify yourself, Ignatz. I'm happy to hear that you're living a good life. Have you heard from many of the other Golden Deer? She asked kindly. Ignatz managed to calm down after a moment. Not as much as I would like. Hilda keeps regular contact, but apparently, she's having trouble convincing Claude to come to, well, any social event. For now, she's staying with Marianne in Edmond territory. Lawrence is busy as ever, and I haven't heard from Lysithea or Leonie. She knew where Lysithea was. The girl had been working with Monica to try and find a method to remove crests from blood. So far, they'd been making good headway, but there were no concrete results yet. Raphael leaned in conspiratorially. Hey, Edelgard, while you're here, do you think you can lend me some gold? I've been standing guard here for a few hours now, and I'm getting really hungry, but I forgot to bring my money. Please, you'd be doing me a huge favor. Edelgard stared at him flatly. Are you going to pay me back? The resounding silence was all the answer she needed to hear. You two have a good day. Ignatz, keep working at your art. You're amazing, and I have no doubt that you'll be recognized for your talents soon enough. Raphael, keep doing your best. With those parting remarks, she and Hubert left the two to their devices. Hey, Lynn, you can't be sleeping here, come on. Edelgard spotted Caspar shaking a napping Linhard under a tree. She shook her head. If nothing else, those two had remained consistent. The pair of them had followed in the footsteps of their fathers, both incredibly similarly and yet not at all. Caspar had somehow managed to grow even larger in the time that she hadn't seen him, and Linhard managed to get even more lethargic. Although she tended to work directly with the two of them, she didn't see them as often as she would like. There was no need for Caspar to take over Bergely's territory, he had a brother to do that. Despite that, his military prowess had been more than enough to earn him a title, one which he summarily rejected. While he and Linhard did accept leadership roles under the Empire, they were more so in advising. The pair tended to spend their time wandering the world, and she had no doubt that they would soon step down from their roles as soon as the Empire was in good straits again. She decided to leave them to their antics. As much fun as it would be to speak to them again, her schedule was already quite thin. There was only a handful of minutes of spare time left before she needed to make her way to hear Ria's speech, and she needed to spend that time looking for one person in particular, the last member of the Black Eagles. Bernadetta was both easier and more difficult to find than expected. She checked the usual haunts, her old room at the academy that was now owned by a new student, a random storage cupboard that she seemed to have grown fond of, and the deep recesses of the library. When all of those turned up nothing, however, she was genuinely surprised. To her surprise, Bernadetta wasn't hiding away. No, when Edelgard found her, she was simply sitting on a bench by the mess hall, staring out at the pond with a small smile on her face. Hello, Bernadetta. Have you been well? Edelgard introduced herself cordially. Bernadetta jumped a bit, but otherwise didn't react poorly. Hi, Lady Edelgard. Hi, Hubert. I am fine. How are you? Edelgard sat down next to her, a weary smile growing on her face. It's been a busy day already, and I imagine that it's only going to get busier. Are you enjoying yourself? Bernadetta nodded slowly. It's nice to see everyone again, even if they're all a bit different. She really was the same as ever, It was hard to force someone to create an engaging conversation if they didn't want to make one. I'm surprised to see you out and about. You're usually holed up in a room somewhere. Bernadetta let out a soft chuckle. Why yeah, well, I would love to be in my room forever, but I should at least try to come out for something like this, right? Besides, I want to see my friends again. I should be confident for something like this, right? Something in Edelgard's heart melted at the wan smile on Bernadetta's face. Slowly, she pulled the girl into a hug. I'm incredibly proud of you, Bernadetta. You're doing wonderfully just by being out here. Bernadetta made a wailing noise into Edelgard's chest, and she realized that she may have been holding her somewhat tightly. Bernadetta dragged in a long breath when Edelgard released her, although she still did manage to pull off a watery smile. Thank you. And, thank you too, Hubert. Over her shoulder, her shadow hummed. Whatever for? For scaring my dad. Edelgard could almost feel the palpable mirth coming from Hubert. Why, I have no clue what you are speaking of. The incident she was referencing, apparently, one night, Count Varley received an incredible fright. Although the man was staunchly silent about the matter, his maids were not, and rumors spread wildly about it, ranging from the man nearly having a heart attack on the spot to him soiling himself. Still, thank you. Hubert hummed once more, and as he did, the bell tower chimed. At the noise, Edelgard stood. Sorry, Bernadetta. I would love to stay and chat, but I have to attend Ria's speech. I hope you can forgive me. And no, it's all right. I couldn't keep you here. Go do your emperor stuff. Bernie almost frantically waved her arms, and Edelgard decided to allow herself to be pushed away, just this once. Next time, however, if Bernadetta ever lost this streak of confidence she had acquired, Edelgard would drag her out herself. Hubert followed her as they left their final classmate behind. It is with much joy that I have been the guiding voice of Fodlan for these years, and yet, I cannot persist forever as Archbishop. The wisdom of the leaders of today trumps my own, and in my age, I fear that I am no longer suited to fulfill that role. Despite her hurry, Edelgard was only catching the very tail end of Ria's speech. It was nothing fancy, most of the important information was condensed near the end, anyways, and the beginning was a mostly unnecessary ramble about the job she had already done. Ria had claimed it was to usher in the new archbishop in a clean, formal light. Edelgard begged to differ, but it was one point she was willing to concede. Ria was looking down on the world from the balcony within her chambers, and she locked eyes with Edelgard as she joined the masses below. Somehow, Edelgard thought she saw a soft grin grow on Ria's face. The people of today are competent. I feel safe and comfortable leaving the future to them. I believe in what they fight towards. It's a just future, free from the pitfalls of their predecessors. I believe, so long as their hearts remain pure and true, there is no need to fear for tomorrow. Those words, they weren't part of the script. Resolutely, Edelgard stared up at Ria, and she nodded solemnly. Ria had made a great many mistakes in her time. She had allowed her power to corrupt her, and she did unthinkable deeds. To allow her to run free like this may be Edelgard's greatest mistake, but at the same time, she had faith in the future as well. Whatever comes, they would all be able to weather it. Ria turned her head somewhat. With that being said, allow me to introduce my successor, the man who will lead the Church of Ceros to a new dawn, Byleth Eisner. Byleth Eisner. The Ashen Demon. Ria had explained to Edelgard what she had done to that man. How she had implanted the creststone of flames into his chest, how he could live without a heartbeat. It was a deplorable act, one that the man in question was aware of, and yet, he still calmly accepted his role. He claimed that Sothis spoke through him, and he admitted that he hadn't planned on taking on the role of Archbishop at all, but after a long moment, he had acquiesced. It wasn't Edelgard's place to act. She couldn't speak for or against him. The realization that Sothis truly existed, it was already difficult enough for her to accept. Whether or not Sothis was the goddess that the church spoke of was another matter entirely. She could accept that the Nabatean Sothis was real, but she could not accept a goddess who had allowed tragedy after tragedy to unfold without lifting a single finger in aid. Not only that, but she was somewhat hesitant to allow him in such a prestigious position considering his actions when they last met. Whether it be out of ignorance or a misguided sense of affection, he had fully prevented Edelgard from ending the Agarthan menace once and for all. Regardless of how she felt, however, she couldn't act. The Ashen Demon had generated an unfathomably high amount of both political and military clout in the wake of the battle for Fodlan's New Dawn, as it was now being dubbed. There was no safer archbishop to choose for the Church of Ceros, and so she held her tongue. Byleth walked forwards, his face being visible to all. His outfit had been upgraded to a far more splendid garb, white, yellow, and green being the predominant colors. To be frank, it looked hideous, but it was fitting for the church. When he spoke, it was with his usual calm and composed timbre. Thank you all for supporting both myself and the church in the wake of the war. I will do my best to help everyone, so I hope that everyone will do their best to help each other as well. It was short, sweet, and to the point. Anything more and he would rapidly forget his lines, almost in direct defiance to the things that Ria wanted him to say. The audience watched with bated breath as Ria removed her complicated headdress, placing it atop his head. And with that, Byleth had become the next archbishop of the Church of Ceros. Edelgard let out a sigh, feeling a pressure be relieved from her chest that she wasn't even aware of as the people around her began to cheer. That was that, then. Rhea had officially stepped down. She couldn't use her role to cause any more harm if she tried. She had already assured Edelgard that she would stay out of the public eye as much as possible, and that she was free to hunt her down if she broke her word. She cast her gaze to the side, speaking just barely loud enough to be heard. Hubert, I'll be off. You're relieved of your duties for the rest of the day. Go enjoy yourself. Hubert was quiet for a long moment. As you wish, my lady. Without giving him a second look, she slowly began to push her way through the crowd. She needed to find Claude. Rhea stared out at the sea of people below, a small smile on her face. Despite everything that she had done to this point, despite everything she had lost and sacrificed, it felt good to be able to give the burden up to another. Byleth, that child had made it clear that he was not her mother. Suthies did speak through him indeed, and gave her several verbal lashings, but the two were distinctly separate beings. Although Rhea's own efforts had made them one, they remained as two separate identities, and he would choose to live as Byleth instead of Suthies. He had accepted the mantle she offered for reasons unknown to him. Truth be told, she was simply glad that she could provide for him. Glad that her efforts had not managed to destroy the only remnant of Citrai that remained. That child was so similar to her in ways that he would never get to know. He couldn't comprehend how his fond smile was so similar to his mother's, how his taste in flowers matched hers, and how his laugh pealed out in a similar manner. Rhea had wanted her mother back, but she hadn't understood how much pain she would endure to accomplish that goal. Losing that remnant of one of the closest bonds she had ever created would dwarf the momentary joy she might feel before her mother grew eternally furious with her for her actions. It had taken her so long to realize that the bonds she had built now could heal the pain of the bonds she had lost. Why had she been so foolish? The two of them were quiet as the speech ended and they retreated through their quarters. Byleth did not speak, simply staring straight ahead. She regarded him carefully. I will need to retreat from Fodlan as we know it. Today could likely be the last time we can ever speak. Is there anything else you would like to know before we part ways? Byleth was solemn as he stared forwards. I don't think I can move my head without this falling off. Rhea stared at the headpiece, already becoming crooked. With a sharp laugh, she removed it for him. It's merely ceremonial. You don't have to wear these robes or the headpiece if you don't wish to. Although, it may make you appear more regal or holy to the believers. Hold on to them and the headpiece for when you need to pass down the torch, yes. He nodded. Understood. As for your question, how often do you think I'll get the chance to fish? She smiled warmly at him. He'd picked up the hobby in his free time at the monastery while she was training him on the proper way to act as archbishop. That all depends on the workload you are willing to shoulder. I found myself with very little free time myself, but that burden has recently dwindled. Now, I find my hands idle more often than not. He regarded her carefully. I see. Thank you. Somehow, it felt like a disappointing way to send her off. Suthies wishes to speak to you, he said after a long moment. When he turned to look at her, his eyes were alight with a now familiar green glow. Mother. Rhea spoke gingerly. Suthies let out a sigh. Siros, I've already scolded you as much as I could. You understand everything you've done wrong, correct? Rhea averted her eyes. Yes, I do. Slowly, a hand cupped her cheek, and Rhea was forced to look at Byleth's mint-green eyes, flooded with magic not his own. Then you should also understand that I am not truly upset with you. I wish you had never been forced into that corner, that you had never been in the situation to believe that what you did was necessary to restore peace. I am sorry for not being there for you when you needed it most, and I am sorry for leaving you to fend for yourself far before you were ready. I am sorry you had to endure so much pain, and I wish beyond all else that I had the power to turn back time far enough to fix that fate. But, despite everything, I think this outcome turned out well enough, no. Ridiculous. She was almost crying. Mother, I'm so sorry. I can't. Rhea was pulled into a soft hug, and she almost sobbed into Byleth's shoulder. You did your best, Siros. I cannot say that I am proud of the actions you took, nor that I condone them, and yet, it is because of my failure to guide you that they occurred at all. Let the blame for this fall squarely with me, and find a new life for yourself, free from the sins of yesterday." There, Rhea broke down in a loving embrace for far longer than she should have. Less than half an hour later, Rhea was ready and prepared to go. She had recovered quickly, and already had several ideas of where she wished to go. Mikul and Indek were likely still out there somewhere, and she would seek them out. Not to gather them, no, she only sought to ensure their safety and speak to them one final time before she continued on her journey. She could likely get very far without being spotted, and she could live a quiet life without concern if she needed to. The sword and shield of Siros were distinctive, and as thus, she had left them with Byleth. If there was ever a time that Fodlan needed the power of those weapons once more, she would come and reclaim them. Until that day, they would remain where they were. As she prepared to go out a hidden entrance to Gareg Mach, she stared wistfully back at all she had created. And at a familiar face, staring at her from a corner she had not expected. Leaving so soon. She was startled at the noise. "J. Geralt? Why?" He snorted. "This was the same back door I took when I left, you know. Figured you would try to bail, so I waited here." Rhea couldn't meet his eyes as he approached. "And why did you wish to speak to me?" Geralt sighed as he leaned against the wall. "You know, you really creeped me out back in the day. I didn't know what you did to the kid, but I knew that something wasn't right. I kept him away from you, kept him away from this life as much as possible, and yet here we are. Kid went and became the Archbishop of the Faith. Not sure if I could have stopped this or what, but he did it anyway. Didn't listen to a single damn warning I gave him." Rhea exhaled shakily. "You were right to do so, I fear." He stared at her before uncorking a flask and taking a swig. "Yeah. I figured. But the kid really knows how to drive a hard bargain. Time and time again, he tells me that he's fine, that he's okay with not having a human heart, and all this other bullshit he doesn't mean." Rhea flinched at his surly tone. "And you know what? Maybe he does mean it, or maybe he doesn't. I dunno, never could get a read on the kid even when his emotions suddenly got plastered all over his face. Doesn't really matter to me. All I know is that I figured you were gonna be here, so I showed up." When Rhea spoke, it was with a measured voice. "Killing me would make a great number of people happy." Geralt groaned, rubbing the back of his head as he stood up to full. "Man, what is it with you people jumping straight to killing? I've lived a real long time and been a fighter for most of it, and they always think I want to kill people. I don't want to kill you, got it? I just wanted to talk, so here I am. I am sorry for everything I did. I doubt I can atone in this life, Geralt, but I promise you, I will do my utmost. For every sin I've committed, I will live 10 lifetimes of virtue. I don't expect you to forgive me, but dash. Quit your yapping, will you?" Rhea quit her yapping. Geralt sighed again, crouching down low to the ground. "You say all that stuff, but there's no way to guarantee it without seeing it, you know? You're finally getting a fresh start, but who can say how you'll use it? What assurance would you have me give? Blood? Hair? More of my heart? Ask, and I will provide." Geralt stood once more, and with that, she realized just how much he towered over her. Without the accessories, without the glamour of being the Archbishop, she felt terribly small and human. "You've got no idea what you're doing or what type of people you'll run into. The world's different than it was a couple hundred years ago, and in different ways than you'd expect. So, if you need a place to go, come with us." Rhea blinked, genuinely taken aback. "Come, with you?" He turned gruff eyes on her. "Look, I'm offering you a place in Geralt's mercenaries, got it? This is your one and only offer. Take it or leave it. If you want a fresh lease on life, nobody will bat an eye at you if you change your hair and your name. I'm only offering because I'm not as fit for fighting as I used to be, and we could always use someone skilled. If you have your own plans, then let me know now." For a long, long moment, Rhea was quiet. I would love to, Geralt." Geralt stared at her for a long moment with an unreadable look on his face. "Yeah, figured you would say that. Well, guess I'm stuck with you now. Hope you don't mind working with former colleagues. Eloise is a pain in the ass more often than not, and Leonie's pretty much glued herself to my side these days. That kid's probably gonna lead the mercenaries one of these days, so you better suck up to her early if you know what's good for you. She managed a benevolent smile. Is that so? You're giving me a weird look again. Don't be a weirdo like the rest of them, please. I've had it up to here with the kids these days. Slowly, the pair walked off, preparing to meet up with the rest of Geralt's band of mercenaries. A new lease on life, something like that sounded nice. Edelgard had implored her to push humanity from behind. Was this one method of doing so? She didn't know. But from now on, she would try to live her life to the fullest. Byleth watched through the window as his father and Rhea left through a back entrance to the monastery. What will you do now? Byleth turned. Seath. Did you bring the documents I asked you to bring? Byleth had offered Seath and Flayn, alongside the rest of the fighters within the Knights, shelter in the monastery for as long as they lived, or until the monastery collapsed. Whichever came first. Flayn had been ecstatic, and Seath had been understandably more wary. Seath glanced down at the stack of papers in his hand. Yes, I did. Are you already planning an overhaul of the budget? I need to see where we're losing and gaining funds. A mercenary band runs extremely differently from a church, and I have no experience with the latter. I'll do my best, but if I don't do my research, I'll rely on you too much. Seath gave him a pleased smile. I'm very proud of you. You've grown well past the hopeless boy whom I needed to tutor on how to speak to others. Your advice has been invaluable thus far. I would say it's saved my life on multiple occasions. I very much so doubt that, but I will accept the praise nonetheless. I've included a few extra, supplementary documents at the bottom of the pile that you may wish to look over. The door to the chambers swung open before Seath finished talking, and Catherine barged in. Hey, have you seen Lady Rhea? Seath sighed. Catherine, I believe it would be appropriate in this situation to knock first. Byleth just shook his head. She's already left. If you hurry, you may be able to catch her. Catherine sagged. From behind her, Shamir walked into the room. Don't mind her. She just wanted to see Rhea off. Seath regarded the mercenary carefully. Hello, Shamir. This is an excellent time for you to arrive, actually. I have something to ask of you. Will you be remaining with the Knights of Syros for the time being, or shall we begin deducting your pay from the budget? Shamir shifted her eyes towards Catherine. I think I'll be staying for now. You guys have already become short-handed as is. Pretty sure there's nobody else who could handle this idiot if I left, anyway. Catherine was in too much of a slump to notice the verbal jab at her, but she definitely felt the physical jab that Shamir gave. Ow. Hey, what gives? You were getting all depressed. Again. Byleth watched the pair warily. Catherine, are you sure that you don't wish to follow after Rhea? When the knight straightened up, all traces of doubt had fled her face. Yeah. This is where I belong. I would give my allegiance to Lady Rhea, but, there's more to life than her, you know? She told me to live for myself. I should be there for my partner and for the people I fight for. Seath gave her a proud smile. Excellent. Now, if there was nothing else, may I ask that you leave our new archbishop in peace? There is much work to be done. However, Byleth was no longer listening. For the first time in a very, very long time, the whistle around his neck was reacting to something, growing warmer against his chest. Is she here? There was only one place that she could be. Only one place with perfect privacy. Byleth pulled himself to his feet. Seath. I will be gone for a short while. Until I get back, can you handle any issues that arise? Seath spluttered at the sudden responsibility being thrust upon him. So suddenly? I can, but he had already swept past him. There was a single destination he was after. Edelgard sighed as she stood before the war room, taking the handle of the door in her hands. Claude, this had better be good, she said as she opened the door. Claude was reclining in one of the seats, his legs brazenly on the desk. His time away from Fodlan did well for him. His garb looked far more regal, and his posture, although still the same as before, somehow had a more refined air to it. "It is, I promise. Come in, come in." She shut and locked the door behind her, taking a seat on the table across from him. "So, what exactly is it that was so urgent and dire that I had to come alone at the height of the festivities?" She took note of Claude's retainer behind him, leaning against the wall with his full dark armor still intact. Claude leaned forwards, his mouth devoid of its usual charming smile. Instead, it was flat, almost anxiously curved down. "Well, you know that I wanted to talk to you, right?" Edelgard sat up, her attention fully on the man in front of her. "Claude, do not keep me in suspense. Tell me what the issue is, now. Is it the Agarthans? Another threat unknown to us?" Claude looked up at her for only a moment before his eyes flicked back down to the table. "This is about the things we talked about before I headed off to Almira. Do you remember our conversation? Is this about the plan you had to defeat me, or the promise, Claude?" He rested his hands behind his head, reclining even deeper into the chair. "Sorry, Princess, this one's about the plan. As much as I would love to talk about the future, I think we should be on the same page before we make any more sweeping plans that can't be discussed through a letter or two. We've done well enough working together, so I figure it's around time." She could feel a headache coming on. "You've always been quite the schemer, haven't you? To be honest, I somewhat expected you to betray me at some point during our campaign, so I'm pleasantly surprised it never happened. I understand being willing to create a contingency for every situation, so whatever this plan was, I should be able to forgive you for it unless it was comically evil." Claude sighed, looking terribly nervous for a second before it faded. "You heard her, right? Was he speaking to his retainer?" The man in black nodded slowly. Claude spoke again, his face and very posture the picture of serenity. "Go ahead and take it off." Who could that man possibly be in order for Claude to? "Oh." The man in black removed his helmet in one slow, sure motion. Beneath it, a single, piercing blue eye met her gaze, the other side holding a harsh scar that led up to a plain black eye patch. Ratty, unkempt blonde hair hung to his shoulders, spilling out from under the helmet ungracefully. No matter how she looked at it, she recognized this face. She recognized this person. She had grieved for him. Dmitri Alexander Bladdid stared back at her with a single, solemn eye, and in that moment, Edelgard von Hresvelg's anger reached a boiling point. "Claude von Regen, what the hell is this?" she roared, aim coming from her back almost instantly to point at him accusingly. She couldn't decide where her anger was pointed towards, at Claude for bringing her a dead man, or at the impostor for being so achingly close to him. Flames were practically roiling within her at the situation. Her blood burned in tune with her anger. Whatever sick trick they were trying to pull, she wouldn't let it go unpunished. It's me. That name. Even the Agarthans wouldn't know it. They wouldn't know. Claude wouldn't know. He wouldn't. So how did this fake know it? Unshed tears were brimming in her eyes as she spat. "Claude, if you do not explain what's going on immediately, then you can consider whatever goodwill we shared to be ground into dust." Claude seemed unfazed at the hero's relic being pointed at him. "That's fair. I'd react the same way. Honestly, I came here expecting that. Still, at least hear me out before you start severing ties, okay? It's a lengthy story, and I promise you he's the real deal and not some replacement, so you might want to sit down." Dmitri didn't meet her eyes as she turned her gaze to him, and she grit her teeth. "Claude, I will grant you 5 minutes. If I am not satisfied by your explanation within that time, you can consider our alliance finished." At that, Claude immediately brightened up, and she wanted to strangle him. "Great. I was expecting 3, to be honest, so dash. This is not the time to be joking around." Edelgard growled. "Please be serious, Claude. This situation calls for it," Dmitri said, and she almost winced at his voice. "All right, fine. I'll try and summarize it as best I can. So, do you remember when I told you that I had a plan to beat you? This guy was the entire hinge of that plan. To put it in as few words as possible, Dmitri never died. Her fingers felt like they were going numb with how tightly she was clenching them. I felt him die. His pulse went out in my hands. Claude reclined in his chair. Think, Edelgard. It's true that you felt his pulse go out, right? But yet here he is, alive and well. How did I manage that? This isn't the time for games, Claude. Just answer the question. She leveled aim at him once more, flames curling around the weapon and raising the temperature of the room, but he remained unflinching at the provocation. You have all the information you need to answer the question yourself. If you were perceptive enough, you could have figured it out on your own. So tell me, Edelgard, how could Dmitri be alive? Gritting her teeth, she cast her mind back to that time. Thinking carefully, there was only one explanation that made sense. The poison. Claude clapped his hands together. The poison. Exactly. But it wasn't really poison, was it? If it was, then poor little Dmitri here would be dead and buried for real. No, what I used was a really special brew. It was something that I really had to dig deep to find a recipe for, too. Ended up going to Judith for help. What I made was something that could put him in a death-like state, something that would slow the pulse to a mere crawl, barely noticeable unless you really know what you're doing. It kept him just barely alive enough to keep him from going brain dead. Honestly, I have to thank him for being so naive. If he had asked anyone else for poison, I wouldn't have been able to keep him in my back pocket for later, since he'd, actually be dead. You had no idea that it would go the way you wanted. What would you have done if I skewered him? If I cut him down and left him to bleed out? Edelgard bared her teeth. Claude shrugged. Well, I didn't. I don't believe in things like gods or fate, but when it came to him, I had faith. Faith in Dmitri and that crazy power of his. Of course, I had faith in you following through on your promise to attack Rhea, too, so I could manipulate the situation how I wanted. Thanks for that tip you gave me at Fodlan's throat, by the way. Her grip on aim tightened. Of course, none of it would have been possible if I hadn't stayed nearby with an antidote. Kept it in a flask so nobody asked any questions, and it's easy enough to wave it away as being a drink. When you guys began fighting, I hung back, waited for him to go down, shooed you away, and presto. I could get his heart beating again. Somehow, his explanations were just making her feel even more angry. In the face of his relaxed look, she felt like she was being played a fool. Then what of the dead body? I doubt you procured a lookalike in the time you had. That was the finishing blow in all of this. No matter Claude's prowess in lying, no matter how he manipulated the situation to his advantage, he couldn't have created a body from nothing. Claude kicked his feet up, looking progressively more and more relaxed as he laid his plan out. That was the rough part. I knew I couldn't get away with saying that the body had disappeared, so I just did the next best thing. I made a decoy. But that's not exactly my area of expertise, you know? And I certainly didn't know enough healing magic to get him back on his feet after the fight. And that's not even mentioning the difficulty in hiding him afterwards. So I had to enlist the help of someone competent enough to accomplish all three goals, who was loyal enough to me to not say a single word. Lysithea, she ground out through gritted teeth. She was the only one capable enough in healing magic to restore Dmitri, the only one not connected to Edelgard who was close to Claude and could use dark magic, and one of the only ones who could reasonably leave the monastery without suspicion if she were following a lead on her research. You're on a roll today, Edelgard. Yep, I had my wyvern go get Lysithea while I stayed at the cathedral. Didn't you think it was weird when I walked in without my mount? Lysithea was resourceful enough to parse through years of notes to find an Agarthan technique to copy a face onto a corpse. Turns out they had already planned on using that on Dmitri, among others, in the first place if their plans went awry, so I just borrowed that idea. When you left the cathedral, I let Lysithea in through a back door. We replaced the body with a random dead soldier that was around his size, healed Dmitri up, and smuggled him somewhere safe to recover. Good thing that knife of yours didn't hit the heart, or we'd have been in trouble. And, in the aftermath of it all, I had to play lip service to a bunch of bigwigs and act like nothing was going on. Exhausting affair all around, let me tell you. To call what she felt right now pure contempt would not be far from the mark. So then you planned all this to make him your retainer? To help you defeat me when the time was right. Claude's expression soured somewhat. That's simplifying it a bit, but yeah. I needed him for my plans, so he lived. I had to bring Dimitri with me to Almira to keep him out of sight for a bit to recover, and so that I had a direct sea route to Faerghus. If you ever made any overt, warlike moves against Leicester, or if that future of yours would lead Fodlan to ruin or oppression, then Lysithea would tell me, and I would hightail it back immediately. Stealing Eridbar wouldn't be as difficult as you would think, and if I revealed that Dimitri was still alive with that as proof, then you would lose all legitimate claims to the throne of Faerghus, and I would snap up all of the Federation forces you borrowed. With your empire already in tatters. It would be an instant checkmate. She finished for him. Despite the anger that roiled through her blood, she couldn't help but feel mildly impressed. In one fell swoop, I could restore peace and bring us all back to our beautifully peaceful alliance that we all enjoyed. The whole Nemesis situation really threw me off, so I waited a bit to pass judgment. Honestly, I'm kinda shocked you managed to restrain yourself. You didn't kill Rhea, and you pushed for peace. Seems your side of things really worked out, huh, Dimitri? Claude asked with a wide smile on his face. Coldly, she turned her eyes to Dimitri. And you? What part did you play in this? Had he written that letter for her, knowing that she would be in pain every time she thought about it? Had he sat awake at night, wondering if things could have been different like she had? Claude was the one who answered. None. Believe it or not, Dimitri was totally ignorant to the entire plan. I did this all of my own accord. She snorted. I do find that hard to believe. Quietly, Dimitri spoke up. It's the truth. I never planned on leaving that cathedral alive. The three of them were quiet for a long moment. Claude, as usual, was the only one of them savvy enough to pick up the conversation. This plan was all my concoction. Say what you will about me, but if you asked me, I'd say that I'm pretty selfish. Dimitri wanted to die, but I wanted a weapon, so I denied him that. You wanted your brother, but I wanted my own safety, so I denied you that, too. It's pretty simple once you boil it down to its base components. Still, it was all just good luck that it worked out in everyone's favor. I got to save Dimitri, Dimitri got to see a world where his sister managed to not oppress people on her path to freeing them, and Edelgard got to survive. Good times all around. She grit her teeth, her jaw clenching impossibly hard. You kept this from me for nearly 2 years. You allowed me to stew in my grief for that long. Do you expect me to forgive you and be happy in spite of all of that? Claude's expression sobered up. Not in the slightest. But, I want you to consider that I could have very easily just done and said nothing. I did this for my own personal gain, so dash. But before he could finish that sentence, someone spoke up. Claude, I've been around you for far too long to not recognize the signs of a lie. At Dimitri's statement, Claude fell oppressively silent. Edelgard turned to Dimitri, feeling something ache in her chest at the sight of him. He looked terrible. She could still vividly picture the sight of him lying on the ground with their dagger plunged in his chest. And what about you? What do you have to say for yourself? Claude saving me was the single most selfish action he has ever taken. While everything he said was, by all accounts, true, it was in equal parts a lie. He did want insurance in case you did something rash, but he also wanted to keep me alive because we were friends. Hey, don't just talk for me, Dimitri. Claude cried out. Shut up, Edelgard snapped. Please do be quiet, Claude. You're not making your situation any better, Dimitri pleaded. You two are somehow still in sync, even after all this time. Claude bemoaned, slouching down in his chair. Dimitri turned back to Edelgard. I am so sorry that I never reached out to you. Despite everything, despite my faith in you, I was worried that if I took any overt actions, if I did something rash, that I may ruin everything that you've worked for. No, even then, that's not quite the truth. I could easily have reached out after the war had ended, but I feared that you may have hated me for my deception, unintentional though it was. And, once I saw you, happy and healthy, living freely in spite of what had happened, I couldn't help but feel that my presence would only make things worse. I believe in the future you've created are still creating now. It's not perfect, but I doubt any future will be. I couldn't create a better future, and I'm no longer qualified to remain here, so I stayed with Claude. Claude scowled from where he was slouched, but Edelgard ignored him. She was staring up at Dimitri calmly. Slowly, she rose from her chair and walked around to the other side of the war table. Nervously, Dimitri stood up to full, staring down at her with his single good eye. Silently, she took her hand, clenched it into a fist, and hit him on top of the head. Dimitri winced, recoiling lightly from the blow, staring down at her with a wounded and hurt look. Without saying anything, she swooped forwards and gathered him into a hug. Slowly, he returned it, and when she spoke, it was with a choked voice. "I'm sorry for what I did. I thought I'd lost you. You don't know how many nights I cried. You were my brother, you idiot. You can't just go and leave me alone like that, D." A hand gently came to rest on the back of her head, and she allowed it. "It's all right. I do not blame you for what happened in the cathedral. I am sorry, as well. When I made that plan, when I chose to die, I did so selfishly. I didn't want to consider what I was leaving behind, the mess I would leave, the pain I would cause. All I wanted was a reprieve, and I used your campaign as an excuse. Until the end, I was not the king that I should have been. Say what you will about Claude, but he is quite persuasive when he wants to be. He made me realize the weight of my own life." Claude huffed from where he sat. "Getting that guy to open up is a real pain, you know that? It took months to get him to forgive me for keeping him alive. He almost throttled me when I told him that I was forcing him to be my retainer." Dimitri hummed. "Nonetheless, I am glad for it. Glad to be alive, and glad to see you all again, even if only for a moment." For a long moment, she basked in that feeling. Simply knowing he was alive was enough to make her chest warm. Then, an intrusive weight threw itself around them, and her small smile instantly became a scowl. "Hey, remember when you said that you wouldn't join the group hug? Good times, right, Edelgard?" Claude mused. "Dimitri, the first order of business to get me to forgive you is to punch him." He didn't even hesitate. Claude immediately backed off, but Dimitri's fist still landed in his gut. Despite the pain that Claude was clearly in, he still managed to laugh. "Can't believe you'd betray me like that, Dimitri. It hurts." "Ack, the pain." Edelgard disengaged from the hug, glaring down at Claude. "I think that's enough penance for the moment. Claude, you'll be on thin ice for quite some time. The next time you wish to communicate, do so through Dimitri, and I'll be more merciful." Claude managed a shaky thumbs up. "Heard ya loud and clear, princess." With a sigh, Edelgard settled back in at the table. "Tell me about how he got that scar. Is the eye gone?" Dimitri began to speak as Claude pulled himself back into his chair. "I got wounded protecting him from an assassin. It turns out that there are a dime a dozen over there. As vigilant as I like to claim to be, I wasn't expecting such a vicious attack from a child. The eye doesn't work anymore, unfortunately. It narrows my vision, but I am adjusting slowly. And what of that mangy hair of yours?" she commented distastefully. Dimitri pouted, but before he could say anything, Claude cut in. "You see, it's actually a warrior's mane, and it's really popular in Almira, so I'll have you know dash." She tuned out his nonsense, staring at Dimitri. He likely couldn't come back. Not because she didn't want him to, she did, more than anything else. As painful as it was to admit, however, he was as safe as he could possibly get at Claude's side. If he returned to Fodlan, his very existence would upset the fragile balance that she had created. Fallen nobles would flock around him, Faerghus would catapult itself into turmoil once more, and their delicate peace would shatter. She had to choose between her brother and peace, once more. And yet, this time, the choice wasn't permanent. Claude could come to visit for political reasons and could very well drag his retainer along. She would be able to see him, and he could be well. As Dimitri joked around with Claude and the pair smiled at each other like old friends, she found herself getting dragged more and more into their conversation, allowing herself to fall into their gravitational pull. Just this once, she had been granted this chance to atone, to make things right. Just this once, it seemed as though she had been allowed this small happiness. Just this once, she felt as though she could thank a goddess for her luck, for Claude's conniving nature, for Dimitri's resilience. All of her friends were living full and splendid lives. They were finding happiness where it could be granted to them, and building it where it could not. Even those who could be considered her foes at one point in time were due that happiness. Slowly, together, they would build a wondrous future. And, in a room filled with 3 small, tentative smiles and 3 hesitant laughs, that future was slowly being created anew with every step. Byleth's feet moved slowly as he walked up the steps. "What are you so frightened of? She's here, isn't she? I imagine you will make a fool of yourself. But, perhaps that is for the best. You have your charms even when you are stumbling over your words. I don't know how to feel. It's been so long. Do not give me that when you have spent so much time mulling over your words. You have subjected me to far too many of your late-night ramblings to stumble now. You will be on your own. If you cannot manage to speak, then it's 10,000 laps around the throne for you." Wait, Suthi's dash. Her presence had already fled his mind. He was well and truly on his own. The Goddess Tower was the only place within Garreg Mach that would be unprotected. There was no need for it to be while the ground floor was lightly guarded. There was nobody who would attempt a secret tryst here in the middle of the day, save for a few unsavory vagabonds who could be easily scared off by the 2 guards at the base of the tower. Slowly, he ascended the final step to the top and looked out over the balcony. Her head of purple hair shone brilliantly in the sunlight. She was almost bathed in it as she rested on the balcony, one leg lazily hooked around the side and the other stretched out across the stone. She perked up at the sound of his footsteps, and her eyes met his. With a warm smile, Shay and Byleth saw each other for the first time in a year and a half. She gave him a little half-hearted wave. "Hey, bye. Been a while, huh? What's with the get-up?" His voice caught in his throat for half a second. "It's something they insisted I wear. I've been dubbed the Enlightened One by the church, and so, I had to wear it when I became Archbishop." Her smile only grew a little. "It looks awful, but I think it suits you. I think you could pull it off if you just adjusted it a bit. Maybe a bit less color would fit you better." In comparison to him, Shay looked like she hadn't changed at all. Everything, down to the slightest detail, was the same. There was a small lull as they both stared at each other, neither of them sure of what to say. "How are you, Dash? Are you Dash?" They both stopped immediately, and Shay let out a small laugh. "Hey, I'm going first. How have you been doing? Rhea hasn't been running you ragged, right?" He rolled his eyes. "She did, for a time. It was necessary. I wanted to avoid most of the problems that could arise from an unskilled or untrusted person taking the role of Archbishop, and Suthis wanted to ensure that Rhea would be content with leaving without a fuss. It worked out for everyone." She tilted her head. "Is that what you want to do, though?" He lowered his head somewhat. "There are many things I want to do, and a very long time to do them. For now, I think this is what's best. If it turns out to be an incorrect decision, then I can always change my mind and find work elsewhere. So what do you have to do? I mean, you're Archbishop. It's pretty much all that anyone has been talking about for the last few weeks. Practically an open secret," Shay idly remarked as she played with her hair. He approached the balcony, leaning against it and casting a sideways glance to Shay. "Paperwork. Lots of writing and decision-making. Some singing. I've already decided to cut out any unnecessary duties." She snorted. "Sounds like a blast. I mean, who wouldn't want to go from a life where you got to travel with a hot bombshell every day to a life where you got to sing prayers and sign papers for the rest of eternity? I imagine the hot bombshell in this scenario is you. I mean, have you looked at me?" "Very often, yes. You know, even after all this time, I can still never tell if you're messing with me. Seriously, you ever tried playing poker? My father often used me to swindle free drinks from the bars he owed tabs at. All I had to do was learn how to cheat and they couldn't stop me. Why doesn't it surprise me that you know how to cheat at card games?" There was a jovial buzz in the air, a mutual understanding that both were happy to see the other after such a long time. "How are things progressing with the Agarthans?" And just like that, Shay's expression grew serious again. "My plan is a lot harder than I thought. Like, seriously, so much harder than I thought. I couldn't pretend to be Epimenides forever, so I made it clear that I had just fused with her. Those were a rough few days. They really tried to kill me in my sleep, you know. I beat everyone up a few times, made it clear who was in charge, and we just kept on marching happily on, though." He nodded slowly. "As expected. Hard part came after that. Edelgard's ruthless, you know. It's hard to dodge every net she throws out and try to turn a bunch of murderous psychopaths into functioning human beings at the same time. So, you really are trying to rehabilitate them." Her head thunked against the wall of the goddess tower. "As much as I can. Arvel's last wish was for me to bring light to the Agarthans, save them, and show them the error of their ways. I'm doing my best, but it's such a nebulous idea. When it comes to bringing them to the surface, that's already done. We've spent every day on the surface since I met up with them. We don't have a base of operations yet, but I'm working on it. Kinda hard with hunting dogs after you every day. Showing them the error of their ways, I still have to fight to keep them from killing civilians every time we come across a backwater village. And saving them, well, I'm doing my best to keep them alive, so I'm gonna consider that part done. It's gonna be a long, long uphill battle for a lot of them. I know people like Kronia and Mycen are practically unforgivable, but I'm not gonna give up on them, so don't bother trying to convince me." Suthes had sought to exterminate the Agarthans of the current age, but in the past, she was content to simply heal the damage that they had dealt to the world. She was leaving the decision to him, as always. Forever a guiding light, but not a hand that yanks him forth. Perhaps those few Agarthans that remained truly did deserve to be killed. Perhaps they did not. They had committed numerous egregious crimes and caused untold suffering, so by all rights, they likely deserved to die. But, for now, he would have faith in Shay. She would be the first to tell him if they were beyond hope. "If you ever require sanctuary in Garag Mach, don't hesitate to come this way. I'll do my best to help you," he promised, staring out over Fodlan. She glanced at him, swinging her leg back onto the balcony and standing up, still leaning against it. "Thanks, Mr. Archbishop, but I think they'll start frothing at the mouth if we come within 300 yards of this place. Pretty sure some of the goons will start melting if they look at the monastery wrong, not to mention how your little minions will react. I'm not offering as the Archbishop, but as Byleth Eisner. The church will never condone such a thing, but I will find a way to make it happen." Slowly, she reached up and tucked a stray strand of hair behind her ear. "Seriously. You probably don't get how much that offer means to me, but I can't take it. I want you to succeed and be happy on your own, so don't throw it all away on my behalf. Besides, if I want to do this, I ought to do it with my own power as well, right? I want to succeed because I gave it my wholehearted best effort, not because someone else did everything for me. So, for once, I'll have to reject that help." Solemnly, he nodded, and Shay leaned her head back, staring up at the brilliant blue sky above them. She truly did look radiant as she stared out at the horizon. His heart was hammering in his ears as he looked at her, and every meticulous plan he'd made, every thought-out phrase, suddenly seemed to vanish from his mind. "Shay. Yeah? What's up? You've grown a lot stronger than I have." "Huh? Hey, it's not like I've beaten you in a fight or something. You sure you've got the right person here?" He shook his head. "No, you have. Somehow, when I'm standing in front of you, my courage shrivels up into nothing, even after all this time has passed, or perhaps it's because we've lost time between us that I fail to find the words I'm searching for. And yet, you manage to say things that I wouldn't. You manage to find courage and faith in yourself at every turn, and with every step, that brave face of yours only grows more staunch. Bye. What are you trying to say here?" There was a noticeable quiver to her voice. He locked eyes with her, turning his body to face her fully. "When we last met, you told me that you would keep your schedule open for me when I could say what I truly meant, didn't you? Back then, I told you that you were my closest friend, that I enjoyed traveling and fighting with you. That I trusted you. I couldn't put the things I felt into words at the time. I didn't understand them. It was all too warm, too sudden, too new to me. I didn't want to say it if I wasn't confident in it. Now, having spent time without your presence at my side, I can safely say that I understand that emotion fully, and I know that if I don't put it into words now, I will never find the courage to do so. Shay's eyes were wide as he reached into his pocket and extended an open hand. Within that hand sat a ring, one that Gerald had given him before he left. Shay, I love you. Please, marry me. For a long moment, neither of them moved, the air between them so fragile that it could be broken if either of them exhaled the breath they were holding. But it was Shay who broke it first with a slow, trembling, wide smile. Hey, that's no fair. You weren't, I was supposed to go first. Slowly, Shay opened up her hand, revealing a silver ring with a small green gemstone inlaid in it. Byleth's eyes went wide at the sight. Why you? I had a whole speech prepared and everything, and I was all set to start talking, and then you just opened that big, stupid mouth of yours. Of course I'll marry you, bye. We'll probably be apart for a while, but dash. He didn't let her finish, striding forth and pulling her into a soft kiss. In that tender moment, everything fell away. He forgot the words he was going to say, the things he wanted to do, forgot everything but the feeling of her touch. They were both blushing faintly when he pulled away. Resting his forehead against hers, he raised her hand, slowly sliding his ring onto her finger. It doesn't matter how long we're apart. With this, I'm yours and you're mine. Whenever you need me, I'll be there, and I hope I can ask the same of you as well. There was a big, almost wistful smile on Shay's face as she slid her ring onto his hand. I don't think there's anyone else who could keep up with you, bye. If you ever need me, just blow the whistle and I'll come running, no matter where I am. We've got forever and a half, and as soon as I'm done with those idiots, we're going to spend it together, okay? Sotheis had speculated that, since Epimenides had been an immortal Agarthan, Shay may have inherited that immortality once they properly fused. Judging from her phrasing, that assumption was correct. Forever and a half, Do you think you have the patience for that? She rolled her eyes. People mellow out with age, right? I've heard some people say that before. Maybe I'll learn to read a map one of these days. Don't count on it, he responded near instantly. Shay pouted at him, which only incited him to laugh. His heart felt so free. All of his worries and anxieties seemed to have been washed away. There was an irresistible smile on his face, and the ring on his hand was comfortably tight, as though it would never fall off even if he somehow wanted to remove it. Judging from the look on Shay's face, it seemed she felt much the same way. Hey. I'll probably have to leave soon, you know? And you can't go around ignoring your duties forever on the first day on the job. With that being said, 1 month. He tilted his head. 1 month. Shay beamed at him, giving him the same cocky smirk he had grown to love. In exactly 1 month, meet me in Derdriu. Got it? And, I'm pretty broke right now, so dash. I'll pay. The Archbishop gets lucrative benefits, so there's no risk of a loss on my part, he informed her. In fact, that had been one of the reasons. Bet that's one of the reasons you took the job, isn't it? Can't say I blame you. Neither of us ever really lost the merc mindset, huh? She winked at him, and he blinked in surprise. She had already grown adept at guessing his thoughts. Indeed. 1 month, then. On the 25th of Guardian Moon, I'll meet you in Derdriu. Don't be late, okay? She warned him, and he managed a wry smile. Don't get lost. He smoothed out his expression, trying to display how important that point was. He was unsure if the message was received, because all she did in response to his flat look was to smile. Shay perched herself on the ledge, looking out at Gareg Mach. It was then that he was struck by the fact that she was truly leaving again. It may only be a month, but he still wouldn't be able to see her for that time. Hey, bye. I never said it out loud, but, I love you too. So, don't go doing something stupid like dying on me. So long as you live for me, I'll live for you, okay? So stay alive. He glanced out over the horizon, watching as the people below milled about. When we meet at Deirdre, we'll spar and show each other how much we've grown. That's the only way we can live without worry, isn't it? She gave him one last beautiful smile. Yeah, it probably is. I won't slouch, so you better not embarrass yourself. For a long moment, they were quiet, both of them dreading that familiar sound of a warp. But, Shay has always been the braver of the two. Until next time, bye. With a flash of shadow, she vanished, off to lead a doomed people to the light once more. Byleth exhaled softly, staring out at that horizon. There would be an infinite future for the two of them. He could be patient. Footsteps, coming up the stairs. Mr. Archbishop, sir? Are ya decent? Cyril. Come up. The boy's head poked through. Seath sent me to get ya. Said he was getting worried. Were you, talking to someone up here? He glanced out over the balcony once more. Nobody at all. Merely admiring the view. I'll return to my post now, Cyril. My apologies. Without a single extra word of complaint, he departed from the goddess tower, Cyril following closely behind him. Time was closely in his grasp. He could bring it to a halt for minutes, and he could reverse it tens and tens of times. And yet, for the first time, he found himself aching for a future that had not yet arrived. Nemesis had become a battle-crazed maniac with a lack of stimulation and an overabundance of power. Byleth vowed to never become someone like that, to always have someone near him who could rein him in, who could always make him feel welcome and grounded in this world. Nobody had keenly touched his heart like she had. He felt confident that, in the future, he could comfortably stride forwards with her at his side. So long as there was a future to see, he wanted to see it together with Shay's support achieved. Time's hand continued to move for all people, regardless of how much power one may have. Emperor Edelgard's efforts were not forgotten, even long after her death. The dismantling of the crest system was long touted as one of the most important political decisions made towards human progression, as it ended a technological dark age and allowed for all people within Fodlan and beyond to flourish. Her decisions in ruling over Fodlan propelled it into a veritable golden age of progress, and she was often noted as a kind ruler, if not a particularly forgiving one towards idiocy. Over time, the barriers that existed between people were slowly broken down. Races, cultures, and thoughts all became less and less of a barrier for communication, until the thought of it ever being an issue became laughable. Much of the initial progress was attributed to King Khalid von Regan of Almira, who actively aimed to break down these very barriers, alongside his brave retainer, who defended him through the struggles he endured to reach that goal. The appointed Archbishop of the Church of Syros, Byleth Eisner, led the faith with a firm and steady hand. Collaborating alongside Emperor Edelgard, great strides were taken to lessen the reliance that the public held towards the Church, allowing it to exist separately from the governing bodies within Fodlan. While the faith remained within the hearts of many, its presence was no longer a necessity for the people to continue to live. However, there were many strange rumors about the Archbishop: that he never seemed to show signs of aging, that he disappeared for weeks at a time during every guardian moon, or that the melodic voice of a woman that none could see could be heard around him. Alas, there is no historical proof to these rumors, and so, they remain just that. The Archbishop held his post for exactly 40 years before abdicating, after which there are no records of his actions. During Emperor Edelgard's reign, there existed a threat hidden in the shadows called the Agarthans. Led by a malicious fiend named Epimenides, they managed to avoid judgment entirely before fading into obscurity. Some believe this race of people did not exist at all and were merely a force of propaganda for Emperor Edelgard, but some argue that traces of their magic have been found in the aftermath of the restoration of towns and villages, stating that these Agarthans may still exist and have turned over a new leaf by aiding those who require it. Whether this fact is true or not, and whether it pertains to their innocence, remains a subject of fierce debate. It is worth noting, however, that the one called Epimenides has not been cited since the aforementioned Archbishop left his position. It is speculated that the two may have held a final duel in an undisclosed location, wherein they both perished. This, however, is yet another unsubstantiated rumor. And so, life continues on. Thanks to the peace that these people of the past fought for, the people of the future can continue to live their lives to their fullest. The everlasting flame of hope burns on, and it was they who lit the sparks. Check the description for the links to the author.